What happens when family expectations turn toxic and you finally choose yourself? Astria's life had always felt like it was lived in the shadows, ignored, misunderstood, and alone. Her unique ability to sense others' emotions made her an outcast, even in her own home. As her sister Tiffany basked in praise and affection, Astria quietly withdrew, learning to hide her true self. But when she sensed danger to those she loved, she couldn't stay silent any longer. Stay tuned to see how Astria breaks free from years of neglect and begins to carve out her own path. Don't forget to subscribe for more transformative stories. Families face conflicts and financial struggles, but there are also families that manage to stick together, weathering life's challenges. It's clear which kind leads to more happiness, don't you think? My name is Astria, and I've been called an oddball since childhood. I'm not sure what's different about me. I just know that people always say I'm different. Being labeled as different wasn't the issue. The real problem was being overlooked, ignored by my own parents. And that led to a lonely childhood. I've always been unusually sensitive to other people's emotions. I can somehow sense what they're thinking. I don't know how I do it. It's not like I can see or feel anything specific, but it's as natural to me as moving my hand or breathing. It seemed strange to me, and I couldn't understand why others couldn't do the same. There was a time when I picked up a bad vibe from a colleague my father brought home from work. I warned my mother to be cautious, but she didn't listen. Later, that same colleague tricked my father into signing a contract as a guarantor for a loan. Although my mother brushed off my warning, when my father stepped away from the table with the colleague, I said, "Dad, something about the word joint feels dangerous. I don't know what it means, but please, just be careful." My father hesitated and refused to sign as a joint guarantor. Thanks to that, when the colleague went bankrupt and couldn't repay the debt, my father was spared from taking on the entire burden. Another time, while shopping with my mother, I felt an unease wash over me, like a wave pushing against my chest. I turned around and saw a man in sunglasses and a hat with an aura of bad intent. I pulled my mother's hand and whispered, "Let's take the side street." Confused, my mother asked what was wrong. But just as we moved away, we heard someone shout, "Thief!" from the street we had been on. The man had snatched a woman's purse and fled, causing her to fall and hurt herself badly. If we hadn't moved, he would have targeted my mother. These types of moments kept happening, and people started to see me as strange, mysterious. My parents, unsure of how to deal with me, began to distance themselves. The more I experienced, the more I felt isolated. What was normal to me was completely abnormal to others. So, I began keeping my thoughts to myself. I stopped expressing my feelings because I knew no one else felt what I felt. If I stayed silent, I wouldn't be seen as weird. I would just be like any other kid. I have a sister, Tiffany, who's 4 years younger than me. Unlike me, Tiffany was a regular kid one everyone adored. Over time, I withdrew more into myself, while Tiffany became even cuter, more charming. It was clear who everyone preferred. Our parents started favoring Tiffany, showering her with affection while quietly dismissing me. They would say, "Tiffany is such a lovely girl, but Astria seems to be a bit darker." Yet, they noticed I had become less odd, but still thought I was different. What they called odd was my refusal to talk about things that only I could sense. It was how I dealt with the world, but they didn't understand. I grew up with little love or attention from my parents, while Tiffany received all the affection meant for both of us. Tiffany, spoiled and pampered, began to notice the coldness our parents showed me and started to look down on me. "I don't like being around you," she'd say. "Your gloominess rubs off on me. I'm so cute, but your lunar image brings me down." Tiffany would insult me at every chance she got, and our parents would scold her lightly but never made an effort to correct her. When I was in 8th grade and Tiffany was in 5th grade, she was scouted by a talent agency on the street. "I knew it! It's because I'm cute," she said. "They said I could even appear on TV," Tiffany said, pleased with herself. She started dreaming big, and our parents didn't seem entirely against it. "You should calm down and think carefully. I sense something shady about this," I spoke up, expressing the intuition that I had long suppressed because I didn't want Tiffany to get into trouble. Tiffany, who didn't know about my unique abilities, said, "What's your problem? Are you just jealous because you're not cute and nobody approached you? Don't say weird things and stop interfering with me." She seemed furious. Even my parents, who knew about my ability, either forgot about it or were too excited about Tiffany standing on the glamorous stage. They sided with Tiffany and criticized me. After that, I resolved to remain silent again. I told myself that there was nothing good in saying unnecessary things. One day, a student teacher came to my junior high school. He was a male college student who graduated from the school and wanted to be a physical education teacher. As he shared his dreams about education and gave a strong greeting, the teacher and students, especially the female students, were charmed. When he responded cheerfully to the girls' excited cheers, I sensed a dark aura from him. I had always vowed to hide my unique abilities, but seeing my classmates potentially in danger, I decided to break my self-imposed rule. I chose a teacher who seemed understanding and talked to her. "I know that this is sudden, but please believe me and help me," I said. The teacher was puzzled by my sudden request, but agreed to stake out a certain location after school, just as I asked. I didn't tell the teacher the details. I had no reason to think she would believe me, but the fact that she agreed to help without any explanation made me think she wasn't an ordinary person either. The next day, the school was in an uproar. The male student teacher was arrested for violating a public nuisance prevention ordinance. The location where the teacher staked out was near the girls' restroom. Within 10 minutes of starting the stakeout, the student teacher appeared, entered the girls' restroom, and installed a video camera. The teacher caught him in the act. Thanks to that, the female students were saved from being secretly filmed and their dignity was protected. Meanwhile, my sister, who had joined the talent agency, was proudly telling everyone about it, but there were no real lessons or auditions. She only had to pay expensive membership and lesson fees. Then, suddenly, the agency closed down, leaving an empty shell. In short, my sister was scammed. She cried and screamed, directing her anger at me. "It's all because you said weird things. My future is ruined and it's all your fault." It didn't make any sense, but my sister seemed to truly believe it. Maybe that was the only way she could cope. For me, it felt like a disaster and a constant nuisance. Our parents didn't say anything unreasonable outright, but their behavior had shifted. They grew more distant from me and more supportive of her. I ended up feeling like the outsider again, the one who didn't quite belong. I was happy that I could help everyone at school, but I was terrified that my actions would backfire, cornering me in a way I couldn't escape. It was then that I received a call from the teacher who had listened to my story, asking me to come to the staff room. Worried I'd be labeled as the strange one once again, I hesitated before opening the door to the staff room. "You knew something like that was going to happen, didn't you?" the teacher asked quietly, no introduction, no pleasantries. Realizing there was no point in pretending, I gathered every ounce of courage I had and told the teacher about my mysterious ability. "I thought so. I know there are very few people like you," the teacher responded, a hint of understanding in their voice. For the first time, someone actually understood my situation. The teacher revealed that they knew someone with a power like mine, someone who had gone through similar struggles. "Actually, that person is my aunt, and I've been listening to her stories for a long time. You must be carrying a lot of worries because of your ability. Maybe speaking with someone who's walked that path will help clear your mind." The teacher then introduced me to the person. She looked at me with kind, wise eyes. "It's natural to worry, but you don't have to suffer alone." There was something about her gaze, something deep and reassuring, like she could see right through everything I was hiding. Her name was Isolde, and she had the same power as me. She'd been hiding her own abilities since childhood, and the struggles she'd faced mirrored mine. The stories she shared, from someone who had lived through the same experiences, helped release the knot of anxiety and doubt I'd been holding on to for so long. From that day, my interactions with Isolde began. I started calling her my mentor, but she just smiled wryly and said, "Please don't." Thanks to Isolde, or rather, my mentor, I began to change. I had always tried to live quietly, unnoticed by everyone, but as I became more aware of my own power and its implications, I slowly started to embrace life as an ordinary girl again. It was a hard process, but with each passing day, I felt more like myself. However, since the incident with the talent agency, I still haven't been able to reconcile with my sister. If anything, it feels like we're drifting further apart. Now, it's normal for her to ignore me, and when she does speak, it's usually to complain or insult me without reason. I often don't even understand what triggers her mood swings. My power couldn't predict her emotional changes either. Just because you got into college doesn't mean you're anything special, she'd sneer. It's not even that great of a school, and you're just so carefree. My sister, who had hoped to get into her dream high school but ended up at her second choice, became resentful when I was accepted into my first choice college. It wasn't like I'd rubbed it in her face. She dissed me because of her own frustrations. Our parents, rather than addressing the tension, focused solely on soothing her anger and kept their distance from me as if it was my fault and I should just stay out of the way. It seemed that my sister didn't like the fact that I had become brighter since meeting my mentor. To my sister, I had to be a dark and gloomy girl who was inferior to her. But my sister is really smart. It was surprising that she failed her high school entrance exams. Of course, she was filled with frustration and poured all of that into studying at her new high school. As a result, she was at the top of her class for all 4 years and got accepted into a prestigious national university on her first try. I got into the most difficult university. Your college doesn't even come close to mine, she boasted. I lightly responded with, "That's true," to my satisfied sister because I knew nothing good would come from getting too involved with her. However, my sister thought that my light reaction was belittling her accomplishments and unleashed a barrage of verbal abuse at me. Both my parents were at their wits' end with my sister, who couldn't be calmed down once she lost her temper. All they could do was watch nervously. They blamed me for causing the trouble and eventually ended up calling me a troublemaker. I wanted to argue back about who the real problem child was, but I always swallowed my words to avoid complicating things further. Setting aside my sister's issues, as I approached college graduation, I had to seriously confront my own career path. I was no longer as introverted as I used to be. I still struggled with socializing and had little confidence in building good relationships with others. My ability allowed me to detect people's negative emotions. While I could sense positive emotions too, it seemed people were more prone to negative ones, which made detecting such negativity painful for me. Throughout my school life, I was tormented by these swirling negative emotions and had come close to losing faith in people. Could someone like me really manage to work at a company? I decided to consult my mentor about this dilemma. I wanted to learn how she had overcome similar issues, as I was sure she had faced them as well. I have experienced the same worries as you. Maybe you should consider doing the kind of work I do, she suggested. My mentor used to work as a fortune teller and a counselor, helping people resolve their problems. She could use her abilities to their fullest extent and contribute to the world and people around her. Also, she was able to work freelance, which meant she didn't have to belong to any organization. This way, there were fewer chances of getting entangled in human relationships or being affected by other people's emotions. "It's the perfect job for people like us," she said. Encouraged by my mentor, I decided to pursue the same line of work. She taught me everything from how to do the job to how to acquire clients. Nowadays, thanks to the internet, it's possible to work from home without any issues. When I told my parents and sister that I would not seek employment after graduation and work from home instead, they responded, "What's that? What kind of job is that? Seems so dumb. You'll be home all the time. At least make sure to do the housework. Can you even make a living doing that? How will you cover living expenses?" Well, as long as you contribute to the household, do whatever you want. While I expected such a response from my parents, it made me feel a little lonely that they didn't support me more. I felt sad thinking about their demands for housework and money. My mood darkened, and so my life working from home began. At first, I had no job requests and struggled day by day, feeling helpless. But with my mentor's guidance, I slowly found my footing and began earning a living. For nearly a year, I couldn't contribute financially to the household, so I took on the housework instead. My dad didn't seem impressed, but my mom, ever the peacemaker, kept him in check. After about a year, when I finally started contributing financially, my dad mocked me. "Oh, finally earning some pocket change, huh?" he said, but I could see the subtle satisfaction in his eyes as the money started rolling in. Still, even though I was contributing, the pile of housework didn't decrease. Our lives remained unchanged. Then, 3 years later, my sister graduated from college and landed a job at a foreign company. Unlike you, I'm an elite. You're just unemployed, living at the bottom of the barrel. It's so depressing having you as a sister, she'd say. My sister, who'd managed to land a job, started belittling me for working from home. What are you doing working from home? That's like playing. You're nothing more than a parasite living at home. She'd throw in jabs like, it's really weird not working outside. I'm working hard, earning everyone's respect. Now I'm promoted to team leader. My pay's probably 5 times yours. There's no way a homebody like you could ever earn that much. Tiffany, who had barely spent a year and a half at the company before being promoted to team leader, kept looking down on me. She flaunted her good salary, yet hardly contributed any money to the household. The chores were all dumped onto Mom and me: laundry, cleaning, preparing meals, everything. When I'd try to speak up, Tiffany, you should take care of yourself a little. You can't just spend all your money on fun. You need to contribute to the house, too. She'd dismiss me with a wave. You, the unemployed one, can handle the chores. I'm saving my money for my future. Our parents, as usual, allowed her to do as she pleased. For some inexplicable reason, they'd say, it's Tiffany. It can't be helped. I had become accustomed to my current lifestyle, and it was comfortable. It allowed me to work in peace, but I was starting to wonder how I could take care of myself, how I could stop being the one who always had to pick up the slack. Then, one day, my sister dropped a bombshell. Without any warning, both our parents and I were caught off guard. He's a real elite with an annual income, she said, sneering at me. Marriage is just a pipe dream for someone unemployed like you, isn't it? She continued, casually announcing that she would bring her boyfriend over the following Sunday. Sunday arrived, and we were still reeling from the sudden developments. The man my sister introduced was impeccably dressed, sharp in a suit. He looked like a young, successful professional. Nice to meet you. My name is Braxton, he said, his voice smooth and confident. I would like to ask for your permission to marry Tiffany. He greeted us with polite manners, his presence commanding respect. Isn't he wonderful, just like I said? Tiffany gushed. I'm going to be so happy with this man. Dad, clearly impressed by Braxton's presence, asked, So, Braxton, what do you do for a living? Yes, I'm currently training at a company my father knows, Braxton replied, a slight smile on his face. We were puzzled by the term training. But Tiffany, unable to contain her excitement, chimed in with a gleam in her eye. His father is the president. He's training now to take over the presidency in the future. My sister was practically glowing with pride, picturing herself as the future president's wife. After that, we exchanged pleasantries, and Braxton left with an air of effortless charm. There were a few things that made me raise an eyebrow during the conversation, but my parents were thrilled with the high-status man. However, I felt an inexplicable dark shadow from that seemingly refreshing and good-natured man, Braxton. It was something only I could sense, so I didn't know how to explain it. I could no longer remain silent, fearing that marrying a man with hidden issues would make my sister unhappy. Tiffany, you've only been dating him for less than 4 months. You might want to understand him a little more before deciding to get married, I cautioned, driven by a strong gut feeling. Sis, he's an elite and a future CEO. You won't find anyone better than him. Oh, I see. You're jealous, aren't you? You're bitter because you're comparing your life to my happy one. Poor jobless sis, she retorted. Even our parents got angry at me for interfering with Tiffany's happiness. You're just unemployed, so at the very least, stop interfering with your sister's happiness, they said. It was clear that our parents were hoping to secure a comfortable old age by marrying Tiffany off to a wealthy man. Frustrated by my inability to effectively communicate my concern about the dark shadow I sensed looming over Tiffany, my head was spinning. In the meantime, the two got engaged, and a meeting between both families took place. Braxton's parents, like him, carried an air of freshness about them, but I felt the same ominous cloud hidden behind them. However, I was unable to convey this danger to my overjoyed sister and parents. Before I knew it, the day of the wedding had arrived. The CEO of our company is attending today's reception. Can you comprehend how much I'm appreciated and anticipated in my company? "I guess it's a kind of honor that a shut-in like you wouldn't understand," my sister said gleefully before leaving the house. She always included some derogatory words directed at me. At the wedding ceremony held at a hotel, the couple, who pledged eternal love to each other, entered the reception hall. Watching my sister, who was beaming with joy, I worried about how long this happiness would last. As my sister mentioned, the CEO made a keynote speech full of praise for her, which delighted her. Once the speeches were over, food and drinks were served to each table. There were all sorts of delicious-looking dishes, but I started to feel a sense of discomfort gradually. I realized that no dishes were being served in front of me. At first, I thought my meal was just late, but other tables were already being served drinks, appetizers, and so on, one after another. Clearly something was off. Nothing was being delivered to me. People at the same table began to notice this oddity and started whispering among themselves. At that moment, my sister came over to me and whispered into my ear with laughter in her voice. "We didn't prepare free meals for the unemployed after all. It's such a waste to serve such food to a jobless person. You should just eat potato chips at home. Just leave your gift money and go home." This outrageous remark was spoken loudly in my ear, and my ears rang. Braxton, sitting at the groom's table, was grinning and nodding. Even our parents, who at first seemed surprised, said, "Well, it's true. Astria is jobless after all." I was first taken aback, then a wave of anger surged up within me. "I never thought you'd stoop this low, sis. Mom and Dad, this is unacceptable. How could you accept such rudeness?" My parents just scowled at me, never bothering to reprimand my sister. "Fine, I get it. I'm leaving, but don't come crying to me later," I said. "You sound like a sore loser," she shot back. Amidst the chaos of this unbelievable event, a man suddenly stood up. "Sorry to interrupt. I'm the groom's brother, Jasper. My brother and parents are trash, but it seems the bride is even worse." "I can't take it anymore," said the man who introduced himself as Jasper. He continued, "Dad, your company went bankrupt 5 months ago, didn't it? Pretending to still be a CEO is just a scheme to mooch off the bride and her family. Braxton will never become a CEO. He's planning to leech off his wife while pretending otherwise. He's unemployed now." Jasper's words caused a commotion among the guests, but my sister was the most heated. "What do you mean you lied to me? What do you mean, unemployed?" she demanded, her face turning from red to blue, her eyes welling up with tears. Our parents, their assumptions proven wrong, began to yell and curse. The anguished cries of my family echoed throughout the venue. The groom and his parents remained silent, looking sulky. Before the ceremony, I had received a confession and apology from Jasper and asked him to speak his mind without reservation if something happened during the reception. As my sister was berating Braxton with a wrathful face, another man couldn't take it anymore and stood up. It was the president of my sister's company. "Enough already! This is embarrassing! You have no right to criticize the groom! What do you think about your terrible attitude towards your own sister?" The president's angry voice made my sister's face contort in fear. "For one, I didn't attend your wedding for your sake. I wouldn't have come if you weren't the sister of Astria." Suddenly, my name was mentioned by the president, and my sister's eyes widened in surprise. "Huh? Who are you talking about?" "Astria is a goddess to many of us business owners, rescuing countless companies from the brink of collapse," he continued. "In fact, with the guidance of my mentor, I have been working as an advisor for corporate revitalization and growth, starting with fortune-telling and life consultation. I used my abilities to show companies the path they should take. All my advice was spot on, and the companies that sought my help experienced a rapid resurgence in business, achieving a V-shaped recovery. As a result, I had earned titles like teacher and goddess. My sister's company had also consulted with me 5 months ago, and thanks to my advice, it had been reborn as a stronger enterprise. The president, grateful for my assistance, attended the wedding today as well. "I had no idea you're not just a basement-dwelling, unemployed nobody, are you?" my sister said, finally realizing the truth. Thanks to my thriving career, her assumptions had been shattered. "I now earn several times what you do. Despite contributing significantly to the household income, our parents never seemed to care about me. They thought that money was from Tiffany." "Oh, we thought Tiffany provided that money," they said, misunderstanding the situation. There was no way Tiffany would have been contributing money to the house. The wedding reception erupted into chaos, quickly called off. Naturally, all the guests received full refunds for their wedding gifts. "I've already signed a contract for an apartment in my name. I can't afford it on my own, especially now that he's unemployed," my sister sobbed, her voice desperate. "You're the one who signed the contract. I don't know anything about that," Braxton shot back, his frustration palpable. The wedding was a complete disaster, and it all stemmed from my sister's malice. She might argue there were reasons for her behavior, but none of them held any weight. After the fiasco, Tiffany divorced Braxton and demanded alimony. But with Braxton unemployed and his parents having little to offer, her claim didn't amount to much. She could barely manage to pay for the wedding venue, let alone the apartment she had contracted. The place meant to be their love nest stood empty and canceled, but the debts didn't vanish. Tiffany found herself drowning in loans. Her outrageous behavior at the wedding spread like wildfire, reaching her colleagues and quickly tarnishing her reputation. The CEO had no choice but to demote her. Without a place in the company, Tiffany's pride as an elite employee crumbled. She wanted to run away, quit it all, but the weight of her financial burden kept her in place. She ended up in a small, barely visible basement storage room, working a menial job to keep her head above water. Braxton and his parents, who had once tried to leech off Tiffany, now scraped by with day labor. Jasper, Braxton's older brother, had cut all ties with his family, disgusted by their behavior. When Tiffany hit rock bottom, our parents, who had always taken her side, quickly abandoned her and tried to cozy up to me instead. To them, I said, "I've had enough of being manipulated by you. I'm cutting ties. Goodbye forever." I packed my things, left the house, and started fresh in a newly rented apartment. They took Tiffany in, but she couldn't contribute to their household expenses. Her salary was slashed, and without my financial help, they quickly became exhausted. They struggled daily, trying to maintain their old lifestyle, but without the necessary income, their previous comforts turned into a constant battle. Meanwhile, my career was flourishing. I guided companies and individuals in the right direction, using my skills to help them succeed. My reputation grew, and more clients sought my advice. This success brought not only financial stability, but also a sense of fulfillment. For the first time, I felt appreciated for my abilities and the positive impact I was making in the world. After the wedding disaster, I began to grow closer to Jasper. He had shown such honesty and bravery during that chaotic time. We formed a bond, and recently, he proposed. I accepted. If everything goes as planned, marriage could be in our future. Jasper is a man with a pure heart, no dark secrets lurking beneath the surface. Unlike the people my sister had surrounded herself with, Jasper is genuine and kind. I'm excited about the future with him. Together, we dream of a life full of love, mutual respect, and understanding. With him by my side, I feel hope and anticipation for what lies ahead. We've already discussed our future plans and how we want to support each other through everything. Looking back, I feel a mixture of relief and pride. I'm relieved to have cut ties with my parents and sister, who never truly appreciated me. I'm proud of the person I've become, despite the challenges. And I'm incredibly grateful for Jasper, who has brought light and love into my life. As I look toward the future, I feel an overwhelming sense of excitement. I can't wait to see where life takes us, knowing that with Jasper, I'll never have to hide who I am or feel unappreciated. Our love and partnership are built on honesty, trust, and mutual support. Together, we'll face whatever comes our way, side by side. What do you do when the people who are supposed to love you the most ignore you, criticize you, and only come to you when they need something? When the world sees you as different, when your family makes you feel like you don't belong, do you continue to fight for their approval, or do you walk away and choose a new path? Astria's life has been one of isolation and misunderstanding. Despite her extraordinary abilities, her family never truly saw her. Only her sister Tiffany, the perfect child, received their love and attention. Astria spent years holding back, doubting herself, until one fateful moment when she stood up, not just for herself, but for others. She helped save her school from a predator, and in doing so, found the courage to speak out. But even when she tried to warn her sister about the man she was about to marry, her concerns were dismissed. The result was a wedding disaster, exposing the lies and false pretenses Tiffany had surrounded herself with. As Astria's career took off, she realized her family's manipulation had gone too far. She cut ties with them forever. Astria learned that family isn't about who shares your blood, but who truly sees and values you for who you are. She's now living her best life, building her career, and even finding love with someone who respects her. With Jasper by her side, she's ready for a future filled with mutual respect and love, something she never received from her family. So, what do you think? If you were in Astria's shoes, would you have walked away sooner, or would you have tried to fix things with your family? Let's discuss in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more inspiring stories.
I never thought I'd be grateful for my mother's obsession with prenups. But here we are, I muttered, staring at the pristine white walls of our new home. The house was a wedding gift from my parents, Patricia and George, nestled in the picturesque landscape of Upper New York. It was supposed to be the start of our happily ever after, but life had other plans. My husband Bart was busy unpacking boxes in the living room, his tall frame bent over as he sorted through our belongings. "Natalie, honey, can you give me a hand with this?" he called out, his voice muffled by the cardboard. I sighed, pushing away from the window. "Coming," I replied, plastering on a smile as I joined him. As I helped Bart unpack, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He'd been unusually quiet since we arrived, his usual charm and easygoing nature replaced by a nervous energy. "Everything okay?" I asked, placing a hand on his arm. Bart hesitated, then set down the box he was holding. "Actually, there's something we need to talk about," he said, his blue eyes clouded with worry. My stomach dropped. "What is it?" Before Bart could answer, the doorbell rang. He visibly relaxed, as if saved by the bell. "That must be Mom," he said, hurrying to the door. I froze. His mother, Jennifer, wasn't supposed to visit until next week. I followed Bart to the entryway, where he was already embracing a petite woman with graying hair. "Jennifer," I said, forcing a smile. "What a surprise." Jennifer pulled away from Bart and turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Oh, Natalie," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm so sorry to barge in like this, but I couldn't wait any longer." Bart placed a hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, why don't we sit down?" he suggested, leading her to the living room. As we settled onto the couch, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I felt a growing sense of dread. Jennifer clutched Bart's hand, her knuckles white. "What's going on?" I asked, looking between them. Jennifer took a deep breath. "I've been diagnosed with terminal cancer," she said, her words hanging heavy in the air. "The doctors say I have less than a year." I gasped, genuinely shocked. "Oh, Jennifer, I'm so sorry," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. She gave me a watery smile. "Thank you, dear, but that's not all." She glanced at Bart, who nodded encouragingly. "I can't live alone anymore, and I was hoping, well, we were hoping." Bart cleared his throat. "Mom's going to move in with us, Natalie," he said, his tone leaving no room for discussion. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Our new home, our fresh start, was suddenly being invaded. But how could I object? The woman was dying, for heaven's sake. "Of course," I heard myself say, as if from a distance. "We have plenty of room." Jennifer's face lit up. "Oh, thank you both so much," she gushed, pulling us into a group hug. As we embraced, I caught Bart's eye over his mother's shoulder. He mouthed a silent, "Thank you," but I couldn't bring myself to smile back. This wasn't how our life together was supposed to begin. Later that night, as Bart slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. How had our perfect new beginning turned into this? I loved Bart, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was losing control of my own life. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a series of events that would test the limits of my love, patience, and ultimately my capacity for revenge. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the kitchen as I tried to focus on my laptop screen. 3 weeks had passed since Jennifer moved in, and I felt like a stranger in my own home. Every morning, I'd find her rearranging my carefully organized cupboards or changing our routines without consultation. "Natalie, dear," Jennifer's voice chirped from behind me. I hope you don't mind, but I've invited the ladies from my support group over for tea this afternoon. I gripped my coffee mug tighter, forcing a smile. Actually, Jennifer, I have an important conference call scheduled for... Oh, don't worry, she interrupted, patting my shoulder. We'll be quiet as church mice. You won't even know we're here. Before I could protest further, Bart wandered into the kitchen, still in his pajamas despite it being nearly noon. Morning, ladies, he yawned, kissing his mother's cheek before giving me a quick peck. Bart, I said, trying to keep my voice level, can I talk to you for a minute, in private? He followed me to our bedroom, looking confused. What's up, honey? I took a deep breath. Bart, we need to set some boundaries with your mother. She's taking over the house, changing things without asking, and now she's inviting people over during my work hours. Bart's face fell. Come on, Nat. She's going through a tough time. Can't you cut her some slack? I've been cutting her slack for weeks, I snapped. But this is our home, and I need some say in what goes on here. It's her home now, too, Bart replied, his voice hardening. And in case you've forgotten, she's dying. The least we can do is make her comfortable. I felt a surge of anger. And what about my comfort? My work? Does that not matter anymore? Bart's eyes narrowed. I can't believe how selfish you're being right now. My mother needs us, and all you can think about is yourself. His words hit me like a slap. Selfish? I've bent over backward to accommodate her, but there has to be a limit. Well, maybe you need to be more flexible, Bart shot back. Family comes first, Natalie. I thought you understood that. I stared at him, feeling a chasm opening between us. I thought we were a family, Bart, you and me. He shook his head, looking disappointed. We are, but that includes my mother now, too. I need you to accept that. Without another word, he turned and left the room. I stood there, stunned by the realization that for the first time in our marriage, Bart had chosen someone else over me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. True to her word, Jennifer's friends were quiet, but their presence felt like an invasion. I struggled to concentrate on my call, acutely aware of the murmured conversations and occasional laughter drifting up from downstairs. That evening, as I was clearing up the kitchen, I overheard Bart and Jennifer talking in the living room. I'm worried about Natalie, Jennifer said softly. She seems so tense all the time. Maybe this arrangement isn't working out. No, Mom, Bart replied firmly. This is your home now. Natalie will adjust. She just needs time. I set down the plate I was holding, my hands shaking. Adjust? Was that all I was expected to do? Silently accept the complete upheaval of my life? As I stood there, grappling with a mix of hurt and anger, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me looked tired, defeated. This wasn't the strong, independent Natalie I knew myself to be. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I realized that if I didn't stand up for myself now, I might lose myself entirely. But how could I fight back without seeming like the villain in this family drama? Little did I know, the situation was about to become even more complicated, pushing me closer to the breaking point and setting the stage for a confrontation that would change everything. I was in the middle of a crucial work presentation when my phone buzzed incessantly. Ignoring it, I powered through, only to find 5 missed calls from Bart when I finished. My heart raced as I dialed him back, fearing the worst about Jennifer's health. Nat, great news! Bart's voice boomed through the speaker. Cole's coming home. I blinked, confused. Cole? Your brother? What do you mean, coming home? He's quitting his job in California and moving back east, Bart explained, his excitement palpable. He'll stay with us while he gets back on his feet. Isn't it fantastic? The room spun. Another person in our already crowded house? Bart, wait a minute. We can't just... Oh, Mom's calling. Gotta go, love you. He hung up before I could protest. I sat there, stunned. How could Bart make such a monumental decision without even consulting me? Our home wasn't a halfway house for his entire family. That evening, I confronted Bart in the kitchen while Jennifer watched her favorite game show in the living room. We need to talk about Cole, I said, keeping my voice low. Bart looked up from chopping vegetables. What about him? Isn't it great he's coming back? I took a deep breath. Bart, you can't just invite people to live in our home without discussing it with me first. He set down the knife, frowning. Cole's family, Natalie. He needs our support. And what about what I need? I countered. This is my home too, and I feel like I'm losing all control over it. Bart's expression hardened. You're being selfish again. Cole's going through a tough time, and Mom needs all the family support she can get. Don't you dare call me selfish, I hissed. I've bent over backward to accommodate your mother, but this is too much. We're supposed to be partners, Bart. You can't keep making these decisions unilaterally. I'm not, he insisted. I'm doing what's best for our family. Our family? I laughed bitterly. It seems like your definition of our family doesn't include me anymore. Jennifer's voice floated in from the living room. Is everything all right in there, dears? Bart called back. Everything's fine, Mom, before turning to me with a pleading look. Can we talk about this later? I don't want to upset her. I threw up my hands in frustration and stormed out of the kitchen. As I passed the living room, Jennifer caught my eye, her expression a mix of concern and something else. Was that triumph? The next few days were a flurry of activity as Bart prepared for Cole's arrival. I threw myself into work, trying to ignore the growing resentment in my chest. The night before Cole was due to arrive, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Nat? Bart's voice was soft in the darkness. Are you still upset about Cole? I turned to face him. It's not just about Cole, Bart. It's about us. I feel like I'm losing you to your family. He reached out, pulling me close. You're not losing me. You're my wife, and I love you. But my family needs me right now. Can't you understand that? I wanted to understand. I really did. But as I lay there in Bart's arms, I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was slipping away, one family crisis at a time. The next morning, I steeled myself as I heard a car pull up outside. Moments later, the front door burst open, and Cole's booming voice filled the house. Honey, I'm home, he called out, laughing at his own joke. I plastered on a smile and went to greet him, but stopped short in the hallway. Cole wasn't alone. Behind him stood a young woman, her arm linked with his. Hey, sis, Cole grinned, oblivious to my shock. Meet Amber, my fiancée. Hope you don't mind, but she'll be staying with us too. We're getting married. As Bart and Jennifer rushed to congratulate the happy couple, I stood frozen, feeling like an outsider in my own home. This wasn't just an invasion anymore. It was a full-scale takeover. And I was the only one who seemed to care. The once pristine kitchen counters were now cluttered with empty beer bottles and half-eaten bags of chips. I grimaced as I navigated the mess, the acrid smell of stale cigarette smoke assaulting my nostrils. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a frat house. Cole, I called out, my patience wearing thin. How many times do I have to ask you to clean up after yourself? A muffled groan came from the living room. I stormed in to find Cole sprawled on the couch, Amber curled up beside him. The coffee table was littered with more bottles and an overflowing ashtray. Sorry, sis, Cole mumbled, not bothering to open his eyes. We'll get to it later. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to scream. No, you'll get to it now. I have clients coming over in an hour, and this place is a pigsty. Amber stirred, fixing me with a bleary-eyed glare. Chill out, Natalie. It's not like it's a big deal. Before I could respond, Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her face etched with concern. What's all the commotion about? I turned to her, exasperated. Jennifer, look at this mess. It's unacceptable. She waved a dismissive hand. Oh, they're young. Let them have their fun. I'll tidy up later. That's not the point, I snapped. This is my home, and I expect it to be respected. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. Our home, dear. Remember, we're all family here. The word family felt like a slap in the face. I opened my mouth to argue further, but the smell of smoke suddenly intensified. Whirling around, I saw flames licking up the curtains near where Cole had carelessly tossed a cigarette butt. Fire, I screamed, rushing to grab the fire extinguisher. Chaos erupted as everyone scrambled to action. I managed to douse the flames, but not before they left a large charred hole in the expensive curtains my mother had gifted us. As the smoke cleared, I stood there, shaking with anger and shock. Bart burst into the room, having heard the commotion from upstairs. What happened? He demanded, looking around wildly. Your brother? I spat. Almost burned down our house because he can't be bothered to use an ashtray. Cole had the decency to look ashamed. I'm sorry, I didn't mean. Save it, I cut him off. I want you and Amber out, now. Bart stepped between us. Natalie, calm down, it was an accident. I couldn't believe my ears. Calm down? Bart, do you not see how serious this is? Of course I do, he said, his voice maddeningly calm. But kicking them out isn't the answer. We're family. We need to stick together. I looked around at their faces, Bart's pleading, Jennifer's disapproving, Cole's sheepish, Amber's defiant. In that moment, I felt more alone than ever. Fine, I said, my voice cold. If that's how you all feel, I'll be the one to leave. I stormed upstairs, throwing some clothes into a bag. As I zipped it up, Bart appeared in the doorway. Nat, don't do this, he begged. Where will you go? I shouldered past him. Anywhere but here. As I reached the front door, Jennifer called out, Natalie, dear, you're overreacting. Why don't we all sit down and talk about this? I turned to face them one last time. There's nothing to talk about. You've made it clear where your priorities lie, Bart. And it's not with me or our marriage. With that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I got into my car, hands shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, I realized I had no idea where I was going. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't stay in that house another minute. As I drove away, tears blurring my vision, I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and an overwhelming sense of loss. The life I thought I had, the marriage I believed in, it was all crumbling around me. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider a possibility I'd been avoiding for weeks. Maybe this marriage wasn't worth saving after all. I returned home after 3 days at a hotel, my anger simmering, but my resolve strengthened. As I walked through the front door, the eerie silence struck me. No TV blaring, no chatter, no mess in sight. Something was off. Bart emerged from the kitchen, his face a mask of forced calm. Natalie, we need to talk. I steeled myself. Yes, we do. This situation is untenable, Bart. Things need to change. He nodded, gesturing to the living room. As we sat down, I noticed Jennifer peering from behind a partially closed door. My jaw clenched. I've been thinking, Bart began, his voice unnaturally steady. Maybe it's best if we take some time apart. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? He couldn't meet my eyes. It's just the constant arguing, the tension. It's not good for anyone, especially Mom in her condition. I felt like I was drowning. So you want to separate because I'm making your mother uncomfortable? It's not just that, he hurried to add. Your attitude, the constant nagging, it's creating a toxic environment for everyone. I laughed bitterly. My attitude? Bart, have you looked around lately? Your family has taken over our home, our life. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, he sighed. You keep saying your family like they're not your family, too. Because they're not acting like it, I exploded. They've shown zero respect for me or this home, and you've done nothing but enable them. Bart's face hardened. They're going through a difficult time. I thought you'd be more understanding. Understanding? I was on my feet now, shaking with fury. I've been nothing but understanding. I've put up with your mother rearranging my home, your brother nearly burning it down, and you've consistently chosen them over me, your wife. That's not fair, Bart protested weakly. No, what's not fair is you blindsiding me with this separation nonsense instead of standing up for our marriage. The door creaked open, and Jennifer stepped out, her face a picture of concern. I'm so sorry, dears. I never meant to cause such strife. I rounded on her. Oh, save it, Jennifer. This is exactly what you wanted, isn't it? To drive a wedge between us? Bart jumped to his feet. That's enough. How dare you accuse my mother? Your mother, your brother, your family, I spat. That's all I've heard for months. What about me, Bart? What about us? He ran a hand through his hair, frustration etched on his face. I don't know what you want from me, Natalie. I'm trying to keep everyone happy. Except me, I finished for him. Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in making everyone happy but your wife. Jennifer stepped closer, reaching out to touch my arm. Natalie, dear, perhaps if you tried to be a little more accommodating. I jerked away from her. Don't touch me, and don't you dare tell me how to behave in my own home. Bart's eyes flashed with anger. That's it. I can't take this anymore. Natalie, I think you should leave. Take some time to cool off and think about your priorities. I stared at him, disbelief and hurt warring inside me. My priorities? What about yours, Bart? When did I stop being your priority? He didn't answer, just looked away. In that moment, I saw our marriage for what it truly was, a sham, a convenience for Bart to play the dutiful son and brother while I faded into the background. Fine, I said, my voice cold. I'll leave. But don't expect me to come crawling back, begging for forgiveness. This time, you've gone too far. As I stormed upstairs to pack a bag, I heard Jennifer consoling Bart, telling him he'd done the right thing. Their voices faded as I moved through our bedroom, grabbing essentials. My hand paused over a framed photo of Bart and me on our wedding day. With a sudden, decisive movement, I slammed it face down. That happy couple was gone, replaced by strangers occupying the same space. As I left, bag in hand, I realized this wasn't just about saving my marriage anymore. It was about saving myself. I sat in my best friend Sarah's living room, clutching a glass of wine like a lifeline. My voice cracked as I recounted the events of the past few months, ending with Bart's devastating suggestion of separation. Sarah's eyes flashed with anger. That spineless weasel! How dare he choose his family over you? I sighed, feeling drained. I don't know what to do, Sarah. I feel like I've lost everything. She leaned forward, her expression determined. No, Natalie, you haven't lost everything. You've lost dead weight. It's time to take back control of your life. Her words sparked something inside me. But how? Bart and his family have taken over my home, my life. Sarah's lips curved into a sly smile. Remember who owns that house, Nat? Your parents gave it to you, not Bart. My eyes widened as realization dawned. You're right, the deed is in my name. Exactly, Sarah nodded. It's time to talk to your parents and a lawyer. You need to protect yourself and your assets. The next day, I met with my parents, Patricia and George. Their faces were a mix of concern and anger as I explained the situation. Oh, sweetheart, Mom said, pulling me into a hug. We had no idea things had gotten so bad. Dad's voice was steel. That boy never deserved you, Natalie, or our generosity. I took a deep breath. I need your help. I want to fight back, but I'm not sure how. Mom and Dad exchanged a look. We have just the person, Dad said, reaching for his phone. Remember your cousin Michael? He's a divorce attorney now. Within hours, I was sitting in Michael's office, laying out my story. He listened intently, his brow furrowing as I spoke. Natalie, he said when I finished, based on what you've told me, you have a strong case. The house is clearly your separate property, not a marital asset. Bart has no claim to it. Hope bloomed in my chest. So what do we do? Michael's smile was predatory. We go on the offensive. I'll draw up divorce papers immediately. We'll make it clear that Bart and his family need to vacate your property. As I left Michael's office, a plan forming in my mind, my phone buzzed. It was Bart. Natalie, please come home, his voice was pleading. We need to talk. I steeled myself. I'll be there in an hour. Walking into our house, my house, I felt a surge of confidence. Bart was waiting in the living room, looking haggard. Nat, I'm so sorry, he began. I've been thinking, and I realize I made a mistake. Can we please work this out? I almost laughed. Work what out, Bart? The fact that you chose your family over me? That you let them disrespect me in my own home? He flinched. I know I messed up, but no. I cut him off. There are no buts. It's too late for apologies. Bart's face fell. What are you saying? I took a deep breath, channeling all my hurt and anger into my next words. I'm saying it's over, Bart. I want a divorce. The color drained from his face. Divorce? Natalie? Please, let's not be hasty. Hasty, I scoffed. I've been patient for months, while you and your family walked all over me. Well, not anymore. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of concern. What's going on? I turned to her, my voice ice. What's going on is that you, Cole, and Amber need to start packing. This is my house, and I want you all out. Bart stood up, his face twisted with anger. You can't do that. This is our home. I pulled out the papers Michael had given me. Actually, I can. This house was a gift from my parents to me. It's not marital property, Bart. You have no claim to it. As the reality of the situation sank in, I saw the shock and disbelief on their faces. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of power and control. You have 1 week to move out, I said, my voice steady. All of you. As I turned to leave, Bart grabbed my arm. Natalie, please. Don't do this. I love you. I jerked away from him, tears stinging my eyes. If you loved me, Bart, we wouldn't be here. Goodbye. Walking out of the house, I felt a mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, but most of all, a sense of liberation. The war wasn't over, but I had just won a major battle, and I was ready to fight for my life back, no matter what it took. The week following my ultimatum passed in a blur of legal meetings and tense silence at home. Bart and his family seemed to be in a state of shock, tiptoeing around me as if I might explode at any moment. Part of me relished their discomfort, but another part ached for the life I thought we'd have. On the day of our first negotiation meeting, I steeled myself in the parking lot of Michael's office. This was it, the moment that would define my future. As I walked in, I saw Bart sitting there with his own lawyer, a sharp-looking woman in her 50s. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. For a moment, my resolve wavered. "Natalie," he said, his voice cracking, "please, can we talk about this privately?" I shook my head. "We're beyond that, Bart. Let's just get this over with." Michael cleared his throat. "All right, let's begin. Mr. Harrison, we've prepared a comprehensive divorce settlement. The main point of contention is, of course, the house." Bart's lawyer leaned forward. "Yes, about that. My client contends that as the house was a wedding gift, it should be considered marital property." I felt a surge of anger, but Michael just smiled. "I'm afraid that's not the case. We have documentation proving the house was gifted solely to Mrs. Harrison by her parents. It's her separate property." The color drained from Bart's face. "What? But that's our home. We've lived there for years. Be that as it may," Michael continued, "legally the house belongs to Natalie. She's within her rights to ask you and your family to vacate the premises." Bart turned to me, his eyes pleading. "Natalie, you can't do this. Where will we go?" "What about my mother?" I felt a lump in my throat but pushed through. "I'm sorry, Bart, but you should have thought about that before you let your family take over our lives." His lawyer whispered something to him, and Bart's face hardened. "Fine, if that's how you want to play it, we'll fight this in court. I'm sure a judge will see reason." Michael shook his head. "I wouldn't advise that, Mr. Harrison. The law is clear on this matter. You'd be wasting time and money you don't have." The meeting devolved into heated arguments and tense negotiations. Hours passed, and I felt my energy draining. Just when I thought we'd reached an impasse, Bart suddenly deflated. "Enough," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'll sign the papers. We'll move out." Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with sadness. This was really happening. My marriage was over. As we prepared to leave, Bart caught my arm. "Natalie, I know I messed up, but is this really what you want? To throw away everything we had?" I looked into his eyes, seeing the man I once loved. "We threw it away a long time ago, Bart. This is just making it official." Leaving the office, I felt a mix of triumph and loss. I had won, but at what cost? That evening, as I sat alone in my quiet house, the reality of my situation hit me. I was free, but I was also alone. The house that was once filled with laughter and love now felt empty and cold. My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "How did it go? Want me to come over?" I stared at the message, tears welling up in my eyes. This was my new reality. No more Bart, no more in-laws, no more chaos. Just me in this big, empty house. As I typed my reply, I realized that this wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. One that I would write on my own terms. "Come over," I texted back. "It's time to celebrate my independence." I took a deep breath, looking around at the house that was now truly mine. The battle was won, but the war of rebuilding my life was just beginning. And for the first time in months, I felt ready to face whatever came next. The day Bart and his family were set to move out dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside me. I stood at the window, watching as a moving truck pulled up to the curb. Bart emerged from the house, carrying a box. Our eyes met briefly, and I saw a flicker of regret in his gaze before he quickly looked away. Jennifer followed, leaning heavily on Cole's arm. She glanced up at my window, her expression unreadable. As I watched them load the truck, memories flooded back. The day we moved in, our housewarming party, the countless dinners and lazy Sundays we'd shared. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I making a mistake? The doorbell rang, jolting me from my reverie. I opened it to find Sarah standing there, a bottle of champagne in one hand and a determined look on her face. "I figured you could use some moral support," she said, stepping inside. I smiled gratefully. "You have no idea." We sat in the kitchen, watching the proceedings through the window. Sarah poured us each a glass of champagne. "To new beginnings," she toasted. As we clinked glasses, Bart appeared in the doorway. "Natalie, can we talk? Just for a minute?" Sarah squeezed my hand and discreetly left the room. I steeled myself, facing Bart. "What is it?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He ran a hand through his hair, looking lost. I wanted to say I'm sorry, for everything. I never meant for things to end up like this." I felt a lump in my throat. "Neither did I, Bart. But we can't go back." He nodded, his eyes glistening. "I know. I just hope, someday, you can forgive me." As he turned to leave, I called out, "Bart?" He paused, looking back. "I hope you find happiness," I said softly. A sad smile crossed his face. "You too, Nat. You deserve it." And then he was gone. I watched from the window as the moving truck pulled away, taking with it the remnants of my old life. Sarah reappeared, wrapping an arm around my shoulders. "How are you feeling?" I took a deep breath. "Honestly, I'm not sure. Relieved, sad, scared, all of the above." She nodded understandingly. "That's normal. But you know what? You're free now. This is your chance to rediscover yourself." As her words sank in, I felt a spark of excitement ignite within me. She was right. For the first time in years, I was truly free to live life on my own terms. We spent the rest of the day reimagining the house. We moved furniture, discussed paint colors, and planned a complete overhaul of the guest room, Jennifer's old room, into a home office. As evening fell, we sat on the patio, enjoying the peaceful silence. Sarah's phone buzzed, and she grinned as she read the message. "So," she said, a mischievous glint in her eye, "remember my colleague, David? The one I told you about?" I nodded, curious. "Well, he's been asking about you. Wanted to know if you might be interested in grabbing coffee sometime." I felt a flutter of nervousness and excitement. "I don't know, Sarah. Isn't it too soon?" She shook her head. "It's just coffee, Nat. No pressure, but it might be nice to remember that there are good men out there, men who will put you first." I thought about it for a moment, then smiled. "You know what? Tell him I'd love to." As Sarah tapped out a reply, I gazed out at the garden, feeling a sense of peace wash over me. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, I felt hopeful. This house, once a symbol of my failed marriage, now represented a new beginning. It was mine, truly mine, to fill with new memories, new friendships, and perhaps someday new love. I raised my glass in a silent toast to the end of one chapter and the exciting beginning of another. Whatever the future held, I was ready to face it head-on, stronger and wiser than before. As the sun set on this tumultuous day, I realized that sometimes the end of one dream is simply the beginning of a better one, and I couldn't wait to see what this new dream had in store for me. "For better or for worse," they said. Well, right now it's feeling a whole lot like for worse. I grip the steering wheel of my beat-up Honda, knuckles white, as I pull into the driveway of my mother-in-law's sprawling Victorian home. The sight of it looming before me sends a shiver down my spine, despite the warm spring air. I take a deep breath, steeling myself for what's to come. It's Sunday, which means another dreaded family dinner with Marion, my husband Elliot's overbearing mother. As I kill the engine, I catch a glimpse of my reflection in the rearview mirror. At 42, I'm no spring chicken. But the stress of these weekly gatherings is etching new lines around my eyes. The front door swings open before I can even knock, and there she stands, Marion, perfectly coiffed and wearing an expression that's equal parts saccharine and judgmental. "Eliza, darling, you're late," she trills, pulling me into a hug that feels more like a stranglehold. "Sorry, Marion. Got held up at the hospital," I explain, extricating myself from her grasp. She tsk, shaking her head. "I don't know why you insist on working those long hours. A wife should be home, taking care of her husband." I bite my tongue, resisting the urge to remind her that I'm a nurse, not a 1950s housewife. Instead, I force a smile. "Is Elliot here yet?" "Oh no, he called to say he'd be another hour. Some emergency at the ER, I'm sure." She waves a dismissive hand, as if her son's life-saving work is a mere inconvenience. Great. An hour alone with Marion, just what I needed. I follow her into the living room, where she's laid out an elaborate spread of finger sandwiches and petit fours. As I sink into an overstuffed armchair, she begins her usual interrogation. "So, Eliza, when are you two planning on giving me grandchildren?" I nearly choke on my tea. "We've only been married 6 months, Marion. We're not quite ready for that yet." She sighs dramatically. "At your age, dear, you can't afford to wait. Tick-tock, as they say." My jaw clenches. I'm about to retort when my phone buzzes. It's a text from Elliot. Stuck in surgery. Won't make it. So sorry, babe. I'll make it up to you. I show Marion the message, and her face falls. Well, I suppose that's that, she says, her disappointment palpable. Though I don't see why he couldn't have sent someone else to handle it. When his father was alive, he never missed a family dinner. Marion, Elliot's a doctor. He can't just walk away from a patient in need, I explain, trying to keep my voice level. She sniffs. I'm sure there are plenty of other doctors there. Really, Eliza, you should encourage him to prioritize his family more. I take a deep breath, counting to 10 in my head. Elliot loves his job, and he's damn good at it. I won't ask him to compromise that. Marion's eyes narrow. Language, dear, and perhaps if you had a more traditional career you'd understand the importance of family obligations. That does it. I stand up, my hands shaking. My career as a nurse is just as important as Elliot's. I save lives too, Marion, and I won't apologize for that. She looks taken aback by my outburst. Well, I was only trying to help Eliza. No need to get so defensive. I grab my purse, heading for the door. I think it's best if I go. Please tell Elliot I'll see him at home. As I reach for the doorknob, Marion calls out, Oh, Eliza? Don't forget, we have that family reunion coming up next month. I expect you and Elliot to be there. I freeze, my hand on the door. The family reunion. A whole weekend of this, multiplied by dozens of relatives. My stomach churns at the thought. We'll see what we can do, I manage, before escaping into the fading sunlight. As I drive home, my mind races. How much more of this can I take? Something has to change, and soon. Otherwise, I fear this tension with Marion might just tear my marriage apart. I collapse onto our couch, exhausted from another grueling shift at the hospital. The front door opens, and Elliot walks in, his face lighting up when he sees me. Hey, beautiful, he says, leaning down to kiss me. I nod, grateful for his understanding. Nothing a little TLC can't fix. How about you? Any exciting surgeries today, Dr. Hotshot? He chuckles, settling beside me. Just the usual. But hey, I've got some good news that might cheer you up. My interest piques. Oh, do tell. Elliot grins, his eyes sparkling. I managed to get 2 weeks off next month. I was thinking, maybe it's time we finally took that honeymoon? I sit up straight, my fatigue forgotten. Are you serious? Elliot, that's fantastic. He pulls out his tablet, already scrolling through vacation packages. I was thinking somewhere tropical, maybe Hawaii or the Caribbean. As we huddle together, excitedly planning our long-awaited getaway, the doorbell rings. Elliot jumps up to answer it, and I hear Marion's voice floating in from the entryway. Surprise, darlings! I thought I'd drop by with some of my famous pot roast. I stifle a groan as Marion sweeps into the living room, her eyes immediately zeroing in on the vacation listings on the tablet. Oh, how lovely. Are you two planning a trip? Elliot nods, his enthusiasm evident. We're finally taking our honeymoon, Mom. It's been 6 months after all. Marion's face falls for a split second before she plasters on a smile. That's wonderful, dear. Where are you thinking of going? As Elliot starts describing our ideas, I notice a calculating look in Marion's eyes. My stomach tightens, sensing trouble brewing. You know, Marion interrupts, I've always wanted to visit Hawaii, the culture, the beaches. It sounds divine. I freeze, a sense of dread washing over me. She wouldn't. Mom, Elliot begins cautiously, this is kind of meant to be just for Eliza and me. You know, a romantic getaway? Marion's lower lip trembles. Oh, of course. It's just, I've been feeling so lonely lately, and I thought, well, never mind. You two enjoy yourselves. I watch as guilt flickers across Elliot's face. No, no, no. Well, he says slowly, I suppose we could look into booking an adjoining room for you, Mom. What do you think, Eliza? I'm speechless, torn between fury and disbelief. Our honeymoon, our chance to finally have some uninterrupted time together, and Marion's hijacking it right before my eyes. Eliza? Elliot prompts, looking at me expectantly. I open my mouth, ready to protest, when suddenly a wild idea strikes me. If Marion wants to play games, two can play. You know what? I say, forcing a bright smile. I think that's a wonderful idea. The more the merrier, right? Elliot looks surprised but pleased. Marion, however, seems taken aback by my easy acquiescence. Really, dear? You don't mind? Not at all, I reply, my tone saccharine. In fact, why don't you help us plan the itinerary? I'm sure you have lots of ideas for activities we can all do together. As Marion launches into a litany of suggestions, I catch Elliot's eye. He mouths a thank you, clearly relieved to have avoided a confrontation. If only he knew what I was really thinking. While Marion chatters on about luau's and snorkeling trips, my mind races. This is it. My chance to finally show Elliot the truth about his mother's manipulative behavior. By the end of this honeymoon, he'll see Marion for who she really is, and will finally be free of her constant interference. Oh, Eliza, Marion gushes, reaching out to pat my hand. I'm so glad you're on board with this. It'll be just like having a daughter again. I smile back, squeezing her hand perhaps a bit too tightly. I can't wait, Marion. It's going to be a trip we'll never forget. As I meet her gaze, a silent challenge passes between us. Game on, Marion. Game on. The moment Marion leaves our house, I spring into action. My mind races with possibilities as I pull out my laptop and start researching our honeymoon destination. If Marion wants to play Happy Families, I'll give her a show she'll never forget. Eliza? Elliot's voice interrupts my furious typing. What are you doing? I look up, plastering on a smile. Just getting a head start on our trip planning, honey. Your mother seemed so excited, I thought I'd surprise her with some ideas. Elliot's face softens. You're amazing, you know that? Most women would be furious about their mother-in-law crashing their honeymoon. If only you knew, I think, but outwardly I just shrug. Well, you know what they say, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. He laughs, clearly thinking I'm joking. Mom can be a bit much sometimes, but she means well. I'm just glad you two are getting along. I nod, biting back the urge to tell him exactly how his mother means well. Instead, I turn the laptop towards him. What do you think about these activities? I was thinking we could do some couples massages, romantic sunset dinners. Sounds perfect, he says, kissing the top of my head. But what about Mom? I smile sweetly. Oh, don't worry, I've got plenty planned for Marion too. Over the next few days, I throw myself into planning our perfect family honeymoon. I book adjoining rooms at a luxurious resort, making sure Marion's room is close enough to ours that she can't complain, but far enough that we'll have some privacy. I schedule a mix of group activities and couples experiences, carefully crafting each day to showcase the difference between our newlywed bliss and Marion's solitary status. As I finalize the itinerary, my phone buzzes with a text from Marion. Just checking on the honeymoon plans, dear. I do hope you're including some family activities. I grit my teeth, typing back. Of course, Marion. Can't wait to share all the details with you. That evening, I present my master plan to Elliot over dinner. I've got it all worked out, I announce, sliding a printed itinerary across the table. Look, I've even scheduled some mother-son bonding time for you and Marion. Elliot's eyes widen as he scans the document. Wow, Eliza, this is incredibly detailed. But are you sure about all this? It seems like a lot of separate activities. I reach across the table, squeezing his hand. Trust me, honey. This way we all get what we want. You get quality time with your mom, we get our romantic moments, and Marion gets to be included. Everyone wins. He nods slowly, still looking uncertain. If you're sure? Absolutely, I assure him, my voice dripping with sincerity. In fact, why don't we invite Marion over tomorrow to go through the itinerary together? I'm sure she'll love it. The next day, Marion arrives promptly at 6 p.m., practically buzzing with excitement. Oh, I can hardly wait to hear what you've planned, Eliza, dear. I smile, handing her a copy of the itinerary. I think you'll be pleased, Marion. I've made sure to include plenty of family time. As Marion's eyes dart across the page, her expression shifts from excitement to confusion, then to barely concealed disappointment. But what about all these couples' activities? And why am I scheduled for a day trip to a neighboring island while you two have a romantic beach picnic? Well, we wouldn't want you to miss out on the full island experience, I explained smoothly. And of course, Elliot and I do need some alone time. This is our honeymoon, after all. Marion's lips purse, but before she can protest, Elliot chimes in. I think it looks great, Mom. Eliza's put a lot of thought into this. I watch as Marion struggles to maintain her composure, clearly torn between her desire to control the situation and her need to keep up appearances. Finally, she forces a smile. Of course, dear. It's lovely. I'm sure we'll have a wonderful time. As she leaves, I catch a glimpse of the thunderous expression on her face. My heart races with a mix of anticipation and dread. The game is on, and the stakes have never been higher. One way or another, this honeymoon will change everything. The days leading up to our honeymoon fly by in a whirlwind of preparations and barely concealed tension. I'm meticulously packing our suitcases when Elliot walks in, his face creased with worry. "Eliza, can we talk?" he asks, perching on the edge of our bed. I pause, a knot forming in my stomach. "Of course, honey. What's wrong?" He sighs, running a hand through his hair. "It's Mom. She called me at work today, upset about the itinerary. She feels like we're trying to exclude her." I force myself to remain calm, though my heart is racing. "That's ridiculous. We've included her in plenty of activities." I know, Elliot says, his voice tinged with frustration. "But she's threatening to back out of the trip altogether. She says if we don't want her there, she'll just stay home." For a moment, wild hope surges through me. Could it really be this easy? But then I see the pain in Elliot's eyes, and I know I can't let him down. "We can't let that happen," I say, surprising even myself with my vehemence. "This trip means so much to you, having both of us there. I'll talk to her, smooth things over." Elliot's face lights up with relief. "You'd do that? Oh, Eliza, you're amazing. I don't know what I'd do without you." As he pulls me into a hug, guilt gnaws at my insides. What am I doing? Am I any better than Marion, manipulating the situation like this? But it's too late to back down now. That afternoon, I drive to Marion's house armed with a revised itinerary and a plan. Marion answers the door, her face a mask of cold politeness. "Eliza, what a surprise." "Hi, Marion," I say, forcing a smile. "I heard you were having second thoughts about the trip. I wanted to come by and clear the air." She ushers me inside, and we sit in her overly formal living room. I pull out the new itinerary, launching into my carefully prepared speech. I realize now that our original plan might have seemed a bit exclusionary, I begin. So I've made some changes. Look, I've added more group activities, and I've even scheduled some one-on-one time for you and me to get to know each other better. Marion's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. "You and me? Really?" I nod, warming to my performance. "Of course. We're family now, Marion. I want us to be close." As we go through the new schedule, I can see Marion's resistance crumbling. By the time I leave, she's not only back on board with the trip, but actually seems excited about it. Back in my car, I let out a long, shaky breath. I've done it. I've secured Marion's participation in her own undoing. But at what cost? That night, as Elliot and I lay in bed, he turns to me with a tender smile. "I don't know how you did it, but Mom called me gushing about how wonderful you are. She can't wait for the trip now." I force a smile, guilt churning in my stomach. "That's great, honey. I'm glad we worked it out." As Elliot drifts off to sleep, I lie awake, staring at the ceiling. What have I become in my quest to expose Marion? Am I turning into the very thing I despise? But then I remember all the snide comments, the constant criticism, the way Marion has tried to come between Elliot and me from day one. No, I decide. I'm not like her. I'm protecting my marriage, my happiness. This is necessary. With newfound resolve, I begin to mentally prepare for the trip ahead. In just a few days, we'll be jetting off to California, and the real game will begin. I've set the stage perfectly. Now it's time to watch Marion's true colors come to light. As I finally drift off to sleep, one thought echoes in my mind. There's no turning back now. The California sun beats down on us as we step out of the airport shuttle. I inhale deeply, savoring the salty ocean air. This is it. Our honeymoon has finally begun. "Oh, isn't this lovely?" Marion chirps, her eyes darting around the resort's lavish entrance. "Elliot, be a dear and help me with my bags." I catch Elliot's eye and give him a reassuring smile. "Go ahead, honey. I've got our luggage." As they walk ahead, I trail behind, wheeling our suitcases and mentally reviewing my plan. Phase 1. Make sure Marion feels included, but not too included. At check-in, I put on my best smile. We have 3 rooms booked under Eliza Thompson, 2 adjoining and 1 nearby. The receptionist nods, tapping away at her computer. "Ah, yes. We have you and Mr. Thompson in a beachfront suite, and Mrs. Thompson Sr. in a garden view room on the floor above." Marion's head snaps up. "Garden view? But I thought—" "It's the only room available that was close to ours, Marion," I interject smoothly. "I'm sure the view is lovely." Before she can protest further, I usher us all towards the elevators. As we ride up, I can feel the tension radiating off Marion in waves. The next morning, I wake early, slipping out of bed without disturbing Elliot. I have a busy day ahead, and everything needs to go perfectly. We meet Marion for breakfast, where I've arranged a special surprise. Look, Marion, I say, handing her an envelope. I've booked you a full day at the spa. Massages, facials, the works. Her eyes light up, but then narrow suspiciously. That's very thoughtful, Eliza, but what will you two be doing? I wave my hand dismissively. Oh, just some boring couples activities. Trust me, you're not missing out. As soon as Marion's whisked away to the spa, I turn to Elliot with a mischievous grin. Ready for our adventure, honey? We spend the day snorkeling in crystal-clear waters, picnicking on a secluded beach, and taking a romantic sunset sail. It's everything I've dreamed our honeymoon would be. But as we return to the resort, glowing and sandy, we run smack into Marion in the lobby. Her face is thunderous. Where have you two been? She demands. I've been trying to reach you all day. Elliot looks guilty. Sorry, Mom, we must not have had cell service on the boat. Boat? Marion's voice rises an octave. You went sailing without me? I step in, my voice soothing. It was a last-minute thing, Marion. How was your spa day? But Marion isn't mollified. She launches into a tirade about feeling excluded and how this isn't what she expected from a family vacation. As she rants, I notice Elliot's face falling, the joy from our perfect day evaporating. Something inside me snaps. Enough, I interrupt, my voice sharper than I intended. Marion, this is our honeymoon. Elliot and I deserve to have some time alone. We've included you in plenty of activities, but you can't expect to be with us every minute. The lobby falls silent. Elliot looks shocked, and Marion looks like she's been slapped. Well, she says, her voice icy, I see how it is. I'll just go back to my room and leave you two alone, shall I? As she stalks off, Elliot turns to me, his expression a mix of confusion and hurt. Eliza, what's gotten into you? That's not like you at all. I open my mouth to explain, to defend myself, but the words stick in my throat. What can I say? That I've been plotting to expose his mother's selfishness? That I've been manipulating this entire trip? In that moment, I realize I've reached a crossroads. Do I come clean to Elliot about everything, risking our relationship in the process? Or do I double down on my plan, potentially losing myself in the process? As Elliot waits for my response, I know I have to make a decision. And whatever I choose, nothing will ever be the same again. The morning after my outburst, I wake to find Elliot's side of the bed empty. A note on his pillow reads, Gone for a walk, need to clear my head. My stomach churns with guilt and anxiety. I drag myself to breakfast, where I find Marion sitting alone, stirring her coffee with sharp, angry movements. She looks up as I approach, her eyes cold. Well, if it isn't the blushing bride, she says, her voice dripping with sarcasm, come to exclude me from something else? I take a deep breath, reminding myself of my ultimate goal. Marion, I'm sorry about yesterday. I was hoping we could start fresh today. She sniffs dismissively. I'm sure you were. Where's Elliot? He went for a walk, I reply, trying to keep my voice steady. Listen, I thought maybe we could spend some time together today, just the two of us. Marion's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Oh? And what did you have in mind? I force a smile. How about a spa day? My treat. As we sit side by side getting pedicures, the tension between us is palpable. Marion keeps making little digs about my temper and how Elliot deserves someone more even-keeled. I'm about to snap back when my phone buzzes. It's a text from Elliot. Where are you? We need to talk. My heart races. I'm sorry, Marion, I say, standing up abruptly. I need to go. I find Elliot pacing in our room, his face a mask of confusion and hurt. Eliza, what's going on? First, you blow up at my mother, and now you're spending the day with her? I feel like I don't even know you anymore. The words tumble out before I can stop them. I'm trying to show you what she's really like, Elliot. She's manipulative and controlling, and she's trying to come between us. Elliot's face hardens. Is that what this whole trip has been about? Some scheme to turn me against my own mother? No. Yes, but I falter, realizing how it all sounds. Elliot, you have to understand. He holds up a hand, cutting me off. I need some time to think. I'm going to dinner with Mom. Alone. As the door closes behind him, I collapse onto the bed, my carefully laid plans crumbling around me. Hours later, I'm startled awake by raised voices in the hallway. I creep to the door, listening. I can't believe you're taking her side. Marion's shrill voice pierces through the wood. I'm not taking sides, Mom, Elliot replies, his voice strained. I'm just saying that maybe Eliza had a point about boundaries. Boundaries? I'm your mother. Yes, and Eliza is my partner. You need to respect that. I hear Marion's sharp intake of breath. I see. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps it's best if I go home early. Mom, don't be dramatic. No, I know when I'm not wanted, I'll book a flight for tomorrow. As their voices fade, I sink to the floor, my emotions a tangled mess. I've won, haven't I? Marion's leaving, and Elliot seems to be seeing things my way. So why do I feel so hollow? The door opens, and Elliot steps in, looking exhausted. His eyes meet mine, and I see a mixture of love, disappointment, and uncertainty swirling in their depths. Eliza, he says softly, we need to talk, about everything. I nod, my throat tight. This is it, the moment of truth. As I stand to face my husband, I realize that the outcome of this conversation will determine not just the fate of our honeymoon, but the future of our marriage. With a deep breath, I prepare to lay it all on the line, knowing that once the words leave my mouth, there's no going back. The game I've been playing is about to end, one way or another. The flight home is tense, with Marion pointedly ignoring me and Elliot caught in the middle. As we touch down, I feel a mix of relief and dread. The honeymoon may be over, but I know the real battle is just beginning. Days pass, and an uneasy quiet settles over our lives. Elliot and I tiptoe around each other, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. I'm about to suggest we finally have that talk when my phone buzzes with a message from my sister. Have you seen Marion's Facebook post? Call me ASAP. My heart racing, I pull up Marion's page. There, in black and white, is a lengthy post detailing how I ruined the honeymoon, complete with out-of-context photos that make me look distant and uninterested. The comments are filled with sympathetic responses from relatives and friends, all consoling poor Marion for having such a cold, manipulative daughter-in-law. I'm still staring at the screen in disbelief when Elliot walks in. Eliza, what's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost. Wordlessly, I hand him my phone. As he reads, his face darkens. I can't believe she'd do this, he mutters. Can't you? I say, my voice bitter. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you about her. Elliot runs a hand through his hair, looking torn. I'll talk to her, make her take it down. But before he can make the call, my phone starts blowing up with notifications. Relatives I haven't spoken to in years are suddenly messaging me, some offering sympathy, others demanding explanations. It's as if the floodgates have opened, and years of Marion's subtle manipulations are finally coming to light. I always thought it was strange how Marion talked about you, my cousin writes. Now I see what was really going on. Remember that Christmas when Marion accidentally spilled wine on your dress? Another message reads. I bet that wasn't an accident at all. As I scroll through the messages, a strange mix of vindication and sadness washes over me. I'm finally being heard, but at what cost? Elliot paces the room, alternating between anger at his mother and confusion about the situation. I don't understand, he says. Why would she do this? Why now? I take a deep breath, knowing it's time for complete honesty. Elliot, sit down. There's something I need to tell you. Over the next hour, I lay it all out. Every snide comment, every backhanded compliment, every time Marion tried to come between us. I tell him about my plan for the honeymoon, how I'd hoped to expose Marion's true nature. I know it was wrong, I finish, tears streaming down my face. I should have been honest with you from the start. I was just so afraid of losing you. Elliot sits in stunned silence for what feels like an eternity. Finally, he speaks. I had no idea it was this bad. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because she's your mother, I say softly. I didn't want to make you choose. He takes my hand, his eyes filled with a mix of love and determination. You're my wife, Eliza. We're a team. From now on, no more secrets, okay? I nod, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Just then, Elliot's phone rings. It's Marion. I have to take this, he says, his jaw set. It's time I set some boundaries. As he answers the call, stepping into the other room, I sink onto the couch, emotionally drained. I know we're not out of the woods yet. Marion won't go down without a fight, and there are still wounds to heal in our marriage. But for the first time in a long time, I feel hope. Whatever comes next, Elliot and I will face it together. And that, I realize, is the real victory. Not exposing Marion, but strengthening our bond as a couple. As I hear Elliot's voice rise from the other room, I steel myself for what's to come. The final showdown with Marion looms, and I know it will test us all. But I'm ready. We're ready. 5 years have passed since that tumultuous honeymoon, and life has settled into a rhythm I never thought possible. Elliot and I stand in our nursery, putting the finishing touches on the pale yellow walls. I rest a hand on my swollen belly, feeling our daughter kick. She's feisty, I laugh. Just like her mom. Elliot wraps his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. God help us if she's got your stubbornness and my mother's tenacity. We both freeze for a moment at the mention of Marion. It's been years since we've spoken to her, the aftermath of the honeymoon and her Facebook tirade creating a chasm too wide to bridge. Elliot had tried in those early days to maintain some sort of relationship, but Marion's refusal to acknowledge her behavior or apologize to me had made it impossible. As if summoned by our thoughts, the doorbell rings. We exchange puzzled glances. We're not expecting anyone. Elliot goes to answer while I waddle behind, curiosity getting the better of me. I hear her voice before I see her. "Elliot, darling, surprise!" My blood runs cold. "Marion." She breezes past Elliot, her arms laden with gift bags, and stops short when she sees me. Her eyes widen at my pregnant belly. "Eliza," she says, her voice a mix of shock and something else. "Regret? I had no idea." For a moment we all stand frozen, the weight of years of silence and hurt hanging between us. Then Elliot steps forward, his voice firm but not unkind. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Marion's composure cracks. I missed you. Both of you. When I heard through the grapevine that you were expecting, I realized how much I'd lost, how much I'd thrown away with my pride and my need to control everything." She turns to me, her eyes brimming with tears. "Eliza, I know I have no right to ask this, but can we start over? I want to be a part of your lives, of my grandchild's life. I've been in therapy, trying to understand why I acted the way I did. I know now how wrong I was, how much I hurt you both." I feel Elliot tense beside me, ready to defend me if needed. But as I look at Marion, really look at her, I see something I've never seen before. Vulnerability. Humility. The mask of perfection she always wore has crumbled, revealing a woman who's finally facing her own flaws. Taking a deep breath, I make a decision that surprises even me. "Would you like to see the nursery?" Marion's face lights up with hope. As we show her around the cheerful yellow room, I feel a shift in the air. It's not forgiveness, not yet, but it's a start. Later that night, as Elliot and I lay in bed, he turns to me with wonder in his eyes. "I can't believe you did that, after everything she put you through." I shrug, my hand resting on my belly. "I did it for her," I say, nodding towards our unborn daughter. "And for us. I don't want her growing up in a family torn apart by grudges. Besides," I add with a small smile, "your mom's not the only one who's changed. I've learned a thing or two about forgiveness and second chances." Elliot pulls me close, kissing my forehead. "You're amazing, you know that?" As I drift off to sleep, I reflect on the journey that brought us here. The battles fought, the tears shed, the hard-won victories. I think about the woman I was 5 years ago, so desperate to prove herself, to win at any cost. And I think about the woman I am now, stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. Tomorrow, we'll take the first tentative steps towards rebuilding our relationship with Marion. It won't be easy, and there will be setbacks. But as I feel my daughter move inside me, I'm filled with hope for the future. A future where love, understanding, and forgiveness triumph over past hurts. In the end, isn't that what family is all about? The pregnancy test trembled in my hands, 2 pink lines mocking me with their cheerful hue. I should have been overjoyed, but all I felt was dread. How could I bring a child into this mess? "Emily?" Jane's voice floated up the stairs. "Are you all right in there?" I quickly wrapped the test in toilet paper and shoved it deep into the trash can. "I'm fine," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. Just a bit of morning sickness. Jane, my sister-in-law and unexpected roommate, was waiting for me at the bottom of the stairs, her brow furrowed with concern. "You look pale. Maybe you should see a doctor?" "It's nothing," I insisted, forcing a smile. "Probably just something I ate." Jane's eyes narrowed, but she didn't push. That was one of the things I appreciated about her. She knew when to back off. Unlike her brother, my estranged husband Richard, who couldn't take a hint if it slapped him in the face. "Well, if you're sure," Jane said, heading towards the kitchen. "I made some ginger tea, if you'd like. It might help settle your stomach." I followed her, grateful for the distraction. "Thanks, Jane. I don't know what I'd do without you." She turned, a sad smile on her face. "That's what family's for, right? We stick together, no matter what." If only she knew how those words would come back to haunt us both. As I sipped the tea, my phone buzzed. Richard's name flashed on the screen, and I felt my stomach clench. I declined the call, earning a questioning look from Jane. "He's been calling a lot lately," she said, her tone carefully neutral. I set the mug down with more force than necessary. "He can keep calling. I'm not ready to talk to him." Jane nodded, but I caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Guilt? Worry? Before I could analyze it further, she changed the subject. "I was thinking of heading to the farmer's market later. Want to come?" The thought of facing crowds made my head spin. "I think I'll pass, but could you pick up some of those strawberries I like?" "Of course," Jane said, grabbing her purse. "Anything else?" I shook my head, and she headed out, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the secret growing inside me. As soon as the door closed, I slumped against the kitchen counter. How had my life become such a disaster? 6 months ago, I'd been happily married, planning for our future. Now, I was living with my sister-in-law, pregnant and alone. I wandered into the guest room, my room now, and collapsed on the bed. My hand drifted to my still flat stomach. How was I going to tell Richard? Should I even tell him at all? A soft ping from my laptop caught my attention. I'd left my email open, and a new message had arrived. From Richard. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. Please talk to me. I know I messed up, but we can fix this. I miss you. I love you. Come home." Tears pricked at my eyes. Part of me wanted to believe him, to run back into his arms and pretend nothing had happened. But I couldn't forget the lipstick on his collar, the late nights at the office, the way he'd pull away when I tried to touch him. I was about to close the laptop when something caught my eye. A folder I didn't recognize, tucked away in a corner of the desktop. Jane's recipes, it said. Odd. Jane wasn't much of a cook. Curiosity got the better of me. I clicked on the folder, expecting to find a collection of Pinterest links or scanned index cards. Instead, I found myself staring at a series of emails. Emails between Jane and Richard. Emails full of pet names and inside jokes. Emails detailing secret meetups and passionate encounters. My vision blurred as I read message after message, each one driving the knife deeper into my heart. The dates stretched back months, long before Richard and I had separated. The front door opened, and I heard Jane's cheerful voice. "Emily, I'm back. I got those strawberries you wanted." I slammed the laptop shut, my mind reeling. How could they do this to me? How long had this been going on? As Jane's footsteps approached, I made a split-second decision. I wouldn't confront her. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan. Because one thing was crystal clear. Jane wasn't the supportive sister-in-law I thought she was. And I was done being the victim in this story. It was time for Emily to fight back. I spent the night tossing and turning, the weight of Jane's betrayal crushing my chest. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I couldn't live under the same roof as that snake for another day. As I stumbled into the kitchen, Jane was already there, humming as she poured coffee. "Morning, Em. How are you feeling today?" The cheerful facade made my blood boil. I slammed my mug on the counter, making her jump. "Cut the act, Jane. I know everything." Her smile faltered. "What are you taltered? What are you talking about? I saw the emails," I spat. "Between you and Richard, how long has it been going on? Months? Years?" The color drained from Jane's face. "Emily, I can explain." "Save it," I snarled. "I trusted you. You were supposed to be my family." Jane reached for me, her eyes brimming with tears. "We never meant to hurt you. It just happened." I jerked away from her touch. "Get out now." "But Emily, where will I go?" I laughed bitterly. "I don't care. Go to Richard. You two deserve each other." As Jane scrambled to pack her things, I retreated to my room, shaking with rage and grief. I needed someone on my side, someone I could trust. I grabbed my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. "Abby, it's Em. I need you." An hour later, I was sitting in Abigail's cozy living room, spilling out the whole sordid tale. My oldest friend listened, her face a mix of shock and fury. Those lying, cheating bastards, Abby growled when I finished. I'm so sorry. I wiped away tears I hadn't realized were falling. I don't know what to do, Abby. I'm pregnant, alone, and I've lost everything. Abby's eyes hardened with determination. No, you haven't. You've still got me, and we're going to make those two pay for what they've done. I blinked, surprised by the venom in her voice. What do you mean? A slow, wicked smile spread across Abby's face. I mean, it's time for a little revenge, honey. They think they can walk all over you? Let's show them how wrong they are. Part of me recoiled at the idea. I'd never been the type for revenge. But another part, a darker part I barely recognized, thrilled at the thought of making Richard and Jane suffer like I had. What did you have in mind? I asked, leaning forward. Abby's grin widened. First things first, we need to gather evidence. Those emails are a good start, but we need more. Phone records, credit card statements, anything that proves their affair. I nodded, my mind racing. Richard's always been careless with his phone. I bet I could get into it if I had the chance. Perfect, Abby said, and Jane's bound to slip up eventually. We just need to be patient and watch for our moment. As Abby outlined her plan, I felt a strange mix of excitement and fear. This wasn't like me. I'd always been the peacemaker, the one who avoided conflict. But the thought of Richard and Jane getting away with their betrayal made my blood boil. What about the baby? I asked, my hand instinctively going to my stomach. I don't want to drag my child into this mess. Abby's expression softened. We'll protect the little one, Em. But think about it. Don't you want your baby to have a mother who stands up for herself, who doesn't let people walk all over her? I hesitated, torn between my desire for justice and my fear of the unknown. I don't know, Abby. This all feels so wrong. What's wrong is what they did to you, Abby insisted. You're not the bad guy here, Em. You're just fighting back. As I left Abby's house that evening, my head was spinning with possibilities. Part of me was terrified of what we were planning, but another part, a part that grew stronger with each passing minute, was ready for war. I unlocked my phone, my finger hovering over Richard's number. It was time to set the wheels in motion. Richard? I said when he answered, forcing a tremor into my voice. Can we talk? I think I'm ready to work things out. As I hung up, I caught my reflection in a store window. The woman staring back at me looked different, harder, more determined. Emily the doormat was gone. Emily the Avenger had taken her place. And Richard and Jane wouldn't know what hit them. The next few weeks were a blur of secret meetings and clandestine phone calls. I played my part perfectly, convincing Richard and Jane that I was oblivious to their betrayal. Meanwhile, I was gathering evidence like a woman possessed. You're doing great, Em, Abby whispered as we huddled over my laptop, reviewing the latest batch of incriminating emails I'd managed to forward from Richard's account. They don't suspect a thing. I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and guilt. I never thought I'd be good at deception. Abby squeezed my hand. It's not deception. It's survival. Remember that. The weight of my growing belly reminded me of the stakes. This wasn't just about me anymore. One afternoon, I overheard Richard on the phone with Jane. My heart raced as I fumbled to set up the recording app Abby had installed on my phone. Can't keep this up forever, Richard was saying. Emily's bound to find out eventually. Jane's voice crackled through the speaker. So what if she does? She's got nowhere else to go. She needs us. I bit back a bitter laugh. If only they knew. The conversation continued, revealing details of their affair and their plans for the future, plans that didn't include me or my baby. By the time Richard hung up, my hands were shaking with rage and triumph. I had them. The next day, I met with Sarah Goldstein, the cutthroat divorce attorney Abby had recommended. Well, Mrs. Harrison, Sarah said, reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, I'd say you have a very strong case here. Infidelity, emotional abuse, potential alienation of affection. We can make things very uncomfortable for your husband. I leaned forward, my voice steady. And custody. What about my baby? Sarah's eyes softened slightly. Given the circumstances, I don't foresee any issues with you obtaining primary custody. We'll make sure your child is protected. As I left Sarah's office, a wave of nausea hit me. Morning sickness, or the weight of what I was about to do. I stumbled to a nearby bench, trying to catch my breath. Emily? A familiar voice made me freeze. I looked up to see Jane approaching, her face a mask of concern. Are you all right? What are you doing in this part of town? I forced a smile, my mind racing. Oh, just a checkup with my new OBGYN. The office moved recently. Jane's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained syrupy sweet. You should have told me. I would have come with you. You know how worried Richard and I have been about you and the baby. The mention of Richard's name in the same breath as my child made my stomach churn. I stood up, perhaps too quickly. I'm fine, Jane. Really, I should get going. As I turned to leave, Jane caught my arm. Wait, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about. About Richard and me. For a moment, I thought she was going to confess. My heart pounded as I waited for the admission, the apology, anything that might make this easier. But Jane just smiled, her grip on my arm tightening slightly. We're so glad you're giving him another chance. Family is everything, right? I nodded mechanically, unable to trust my voice. As Jane prattled on about dinner plans and nursery colors, a cold realization settled over me. She wasn't going to confess. They were going to keep lying, keep pretending, keep using me until I had nothing left to give. In that moment, any lingering doubts I had about my plan vanished. I thought of the evidence safely stored away, of Sarah Goldstein's confident smile, of Abby's unwavering support. You're right, Jane, I said, my voice steady. Family is everything, and I'm going to make sure mine is protected no matter what. Jane's smile faltered for a moment as if she sensed the shift in the air. But before she could respond, I was already walking away, my steps purposeful and my resolve ironclad. The time for gathering evidence was over. Now it was time to act. The pain hit me like a freight train, doubling me over as I clutched my swollen belly. This couldn't be happening. Not now, not when I was so close. Emily! Jane's voice, thick with concern, cut through the haze of agony. Oh my God, we need to get you to the hospital. I wanted to refuse, to push her away, but another wave of pain left me gasping. Before I knew it, I was in Jane's car, speeding towards the emergency room. The next few hours were a blur of doctors, nurses, and machines. False labor, they said. The baby was fine, but I needed to stay overnight for observation. As I lay in the sterile hospital bed, exhaustion and relief warred within me. Jane never left my side, playing the role of concerned sister-in-law to perfection. I've called Richard, she said, squeezing my hand. He's on his way. I nodded, too tired to maintain my facade of ignorance. As the pain medication kicked in, I felt my eyelids growing heavy. I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes again, the room was dark. Jane was still there, but something had changed. The mask of concern had slipped, revealing a cold, calculating expression I'd never seen before. She was on the phone, speaking in hushed tones. Just a false alarm. No, she doesn't suspect anything. We're still in the clear. My heart raced as I realized she was talking to Richard. I kept my eyes nearly closed, feigning sleep as I strained to hear more. I know, Jane continued, irritation creeping into her voice. But we can't rush this. Emily trusts me completely. If we play our cards right, we can get everything. The house, the money, even custody of the baby. The words hit me like a physical blow. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting to take everything from me, including my child. Don't worry, Jane said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I'll make sure Emily never finds out. As far as she knows, I'm her rock, her only support. She'll never see it coming. As Jane ended the call, I fought to keep my breathing steady, my mind reeling. How could I have been so naive? I'd known about the affair, but this was beyond betrayal. Oh, you're awake, Jane said, her concerned mask back in place as she noticed my open eyes. How are you feeling, sweetie? I forced a weak smile. Better, thanks. Has Richard arrived yet? Jane's eyes flickered with something. Annoyance? Fear? Before she smoothed her features. Not yet, but he's on his way. Don't worry. I'm here for you. The irony of her words made me want to scream, but I swallowed it down. You're so good to me, Jane. I don't know what I'd do without you. She patted my hand, and it took every ounce of self-control not to recoil from her touch. That's what family is for, right? As Jane turned away to adjust my pillows, I caught sight of my phone on the bedside table. I needed to warn Abby, to tell her what I'd overheard. But how could I do it with Jane hovering over me? Just then, a nurse entered the room. Mrs. Harrison, we need to run a few more tests. I'm afraid I'll have to ask your sister-in-law to step out for a bit. Jane hesitated, but the nurse was insistent. As soon as the door closed behind her, I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. "Abby," I whispered urgently into the voicemail. "It's worse than we thought. They're not just having an affair. They're planning to take everything, including the baby. We need to move fast. Call me as soon as you get this." As I ended the call, a strange calm settled over me. The time for hesitation was over. Jane and Richard had shown their true colors, and now I knew exactly what I was up against. My baby kicked, as if sensing my resolve. I placed a protective hand over my belly, a fierce determination burning in my chest. "Don't worry, little one," I murmured. "Mommy's going to fix this, and heaven help anyone who tries to stand in our way." The day I decided to confront Richard dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times in my head, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. I found him in his study, hunched over his laptop. He looked up as I entered, surprise flitting across his face. "Emily, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk, Richard," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "About us, about Jane." The color drained from his face. "What about Jane?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I know about the affair. I know about your plans to take everything from me, including our baby." Richard's shock quickly morphed into anger. He stood up, towering over me. "You've been spying on me? On us?" "I didn't have to," I shot back. "You two weren't exactly subtle." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like a caged animal. "You don't understand, Emily. Things haven't been right between us for a long time. Jane, she gets me in a way you never did." The audacity of his words stung, but I held my ground. "So that justifies betraying me? Planning to take our child?" Richard's eyes narrowed. "Oh, please. You pushed me into Jane's arms with your constant nagging, your neediness. This is as much your fault as it is mine." I felt as if I'd been slapped. "My fault? I trusted you. I loved you." "Love?" Richard scoffed. "You don't know the first thing about love. You're suffocating, Emily. Always have been. Jane, she lets me breathe." Each word was a dagger to my heart, but I refused to let him see me cry. "And what about our baby? Were you really going to try to take custody?" For a moment, something like guilt flashed in Richard's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by cold determination. "I'd be a better parent than you. You're too emotional, too unstable. The baby would be better off with me and Jane." The room spun around me as the full weight of his betrayal hit home. This man, who I'd loved and trusted, was willing to destroy me completely. "You're wrong," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "About everything, and I'm going to prove it." Richard laughed, a harsh, mocking sound. "How? You've got nothing, Emily. No money, no job, nowhere to go. Face it, you need me." In that moment, something inside me snapped. The fear and hurt I'd been carrying for months transformed into a white-hot rage, but instead of lashing out, I felt an eerie calm settle over me. I looked Richard straight in the eye, my voice steady. "You're right, I do need you." Confusion replaced the smugness on his face. "What?" I forced my lips into a trembling smile, channeling every ounce of acting ability I possessed. I can't do this alone, Richard. I'm scared. Can we try to work things out? For the baby's sake?" Richard's expression softened, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He thought he'd won. "Oh, Emily, of course we can. I knew you'd come around eventually." As he pulled me into an embrace, I fought the urge to recoil. Over his shoulder, I caught sight of a framed photo on his desk. Richard and Jane, laughing together at some party. My resolve hardened. "Thank you," I whispered, my mind already racing with plans. "You're right, family is everything. We need to stick together." As I left Richard's study, my hand instinctively went to my belly. "Don't worry, little one," I murmured. "Mommy's got this under control." I pulled out my phone, sending a quick text to Abby. "It's done. He bought it. Time for phase 2. The game was on, and this time I was playing to win. Richard and Jane thought they had me cornered, but they were about to learn that a mother protecting her child was the most dangerous opponent of all. Let them think they'd won. I'd show them just how wrong they were. The weeks following my confrontation with Richard were a whirlwind of secret preparations and careful deceptions. On the surface, I played the role of the forgiving wife, smiling sweetly at Richard and Jane while my insides churned with disgust. "You're doing great, Em," Abby whispered during one of our clandestine meetings. "They don't suspect a thing." I nodded, my hand resting on my ever-growing belly. "I just hope it's enough." With Abby's help and Sarah Goldstein's legal guidance, I began piecing together my new life. We found a modest apartment across town, far from Richard's reach. I started transferring small amounts of money from our joint account to a new one in my name only, careful not to raise any red flags. One afternoon, while Richard was at work and Jane was out shopping, I snuck into Richard's home office. My heart pounded as I copied financial documents and downloaded emails from his computer. Each piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin of their betrayal. As my due date approached, the pressure intensified. Richard and Jane grew more affectionate, more solicitous. Their saccharine concern made me want to scream, but I held it together, knowing the end was in sight. "We should start thinking about names," Richard said one evening, his hand on my stomach. It took every ounce of willpower not to flinch away. "Of course," I replied, forcing a smile. "I was thinking maybe Sarah for a girl." Jane, lounging nearby, perked up. "Oh, that's lovely. Sarah Harrison has a nice ring to it." I bit back a bitter laugh. If only they knew. The next day, I met with Sarah Goldstein to finalize our strategy. "Everything's in order," she assured me, her eyes gleaming with determination. "We've got them dead to rights, Emily. They won't know what hit them." As I left her office, a wave of dizziness washed over me. I steadied myself against a wall, taking deep breaths. The stress was taking its toll, but I couldn't falter now, not when I was so close. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I overheard Richard on the phone with Jane. "It's almost time," he whispered. "Once the baby's born, we'll make our move. Emily won't know what hit her." Tears pricked my eyes, but I blinked them away. They thought they had me cornered, but they were in for a rude awakening. The next morning, I put the final pieces of my plan into motion. I called my boss, spinning a tale about needing extended leave due to pregnancy complications. In reality, I'd already secured a new job starting in a month, thanks to Abby's connections. As I packed a small bag with essentials, hiding it in the trunk of my car, a sudden pain gripped my abdomen. I gasped, clutching my belly. No, not now. It was too soon. Another contraction hit, stronger this time. Panic rose in my throat. This wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't ready. With shaking hands, I dialed Abby's number. "It's happening," I choked out. "The baby's coming." "Stay calm," Abby said, her voice steady. "I'm on my way. We can do this, Em. Just hold on." As I ended the call, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked terrified, but there was a steely determination in her eyes that I barely recognized. "We can do this," I whispered to my reflection, to my unborn child. "We're stronger than they think." Another contraction ripped through me, and I gritted my teeth against the pain. Time was up. Ready or not, my new life was about to begin. And Richard and Jane? They were about to learn that they'd underestimated me for the last time. The contractions were coming faster now, each one a reminder that time was running out. Abby burst through the door, her face a mix of panic and determination. "We need to go, Em, now." I nodded, gritting my teeth against another wave of pain. "The bag in the car." As Abby helped me to her car, I caught sight of Jane's SUV turning onto our street. My heart raced. We were cutting it too close. "Drive," I gasped as Abby started the engine. "Don't stop for anything." We peeled away, just as Jane pulled into the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I saw her confused face, phone already in hand. No doubt calling Richard. Between contractions, I fumbled with my phone, pulling up the pre-written message I'd prepared for this moment. With trembling fingers, I hit send. To Richard, "By the time you read this, I'll be gone. I know everything. The affair, your plans for our baby, it's over. Divorce papers are on the kitchen table. Don't try to find me." I switched off my phone, tossing it into my bag. There was no going back now. "Hospital?" Abby asked, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. I shook my head. "No, the new apartment. Sarah's meeting us there." Abby's eyes widened. "Em, are you sure? What if something goes wrong?" Another contraction hit, and I clutched my belly. "Nothing's going wrong. This baby and I, we're fighters." The next hour was a blur of pain and determination. We made it to the apartment, where Sarah Goldstein was waiting with a midwife she'd arranged. As they helped me inside, I caught sight of my phone, lit up with missed calls and messages. I ignored it. "Emily," Sarah said, her voice steady, "I filed the papers. As of an hour ago, you're legally separated. Richard can't touch you or the baby without going through me." Relief washed over me, quickly replaced by another contraction. I screamed, the sound echoing off the bare walls of my new home. Hours passed in a haze of pain and pushing. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, a new sound filled the room, the strong, healthy cry of my daughter. "She's beautiful, Em," Abby whispered, tears in her eyes as she placed the tiny bundle in my arms. I looked down at my daughter's face, overcome with a love so fierce it took my breath away. "Hello, Sarah," I murmured. "Welcome to the world." As if on cue, a commotion erupted outside. Richard's voice, angry and desperate, carried through the door. "Emily, I know you're in there. You can't do this." Sarah moved to the door, her voice cold and professional. "Mr. Harrison, you're trespassing. Leave now, or I'll call the police." "That's my child," Richard shouted. "You can't keep me from my child." I held Sarah closer, my heart pounding. We'd known this moment would come, but the reality was terrifying. "Emily, please," Richard's voice cracked. "We can work this out. I'm sorry. I'll do anything." For a moment, I wavered. The pain in his voice tugged at something deep inside me. But then I looked down at Sarah, so small and vulnerable, and my resolve hardened. "Tell him to leave," I said to Sarah Goldstein, my voice stronger than I felt. Tell him I'll contact him when I'm ready, not before." As Richard's pleas faded, replaced by the sound of police sirens, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. This wasn't how I'd imagined bringing my child into the world, but it was the hand we'd been dealt. "It's okay, little one," I whispered to Sarah. "Mommy's got you, and I promise no one will ever hurt us again." As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion set in, but even as my eyes grew heavy, I knew one thing for certain. The hardest part was over. From here on out, Sarah and I would face the world together, on our own terms. And Richard? He was about to learn that he'd underestimated me for the last time. 6 months after Sarah's birth, I stood in front of the courthouse, my heart pounding. Today was the final hearing for my divorce and custody case. Richard had fought tooth and nail, but thanks to Sarah Goldstein's expert handling and the mountain of evidence I'd gathered, we were confident. "Ready?" Abby asked, squeezing my hand. I nodded, adjusting Sarah in her carrier. "As I'll ever be." Inside, Richard and Jane sat on the opposite side of the courtroom. Richard looked haggard, his once immaculate suit rumpled. Jane avoided my gaze, her face a mask of guilt and defiance. As the judge entered, I took a deep breath. This was it, the moment that would define our future. The proceedings flew by, in a blur of legal jargon and emotional testimony. Richard pleaded for joint custody, claiming he'd changed, that he deserved a chance to be a father. But when presented with the evidence of his affair and his plans to take Sarah away from me, his arguments crumbled. Finally, the judge cleared her throat. "In light of the evidence presented, I hereby grant full custody of Sarah Harrison to Emily Harrison, with Richard Harrison granted supervised visitation rights." Relief washed over me, so intense I nearly collapsed. We'd done it. Sarah was safe. As we left the courthouse, Richard approached, his eyes red-rimmed. "Emily, please, can we talk?" Part of me wanted to ignore him, to walk away and never look back. But as I looked down at Sarah, peacefully sleeping in her carrier, I realized something. She deserved to know her father, even if he'd made terrible mistakes. "You can see her," I said, my voice steady, "but only under supervision, and only if you agree to counseling." Richard's face crumpled with relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Emily. I promise. I'll do better." As he walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Back at my new apartment, I was surprised to find my neighbor Sarah waiting with a homemade casserole. Over the past months, she'd become a dear friend, always there with a kind word or a helping hand. "I thought you might need this after today," she said, her smile warm. As we sat talking over dinner, Sarah suddenly grew serious. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you. I'm not just a neighbor. I'm actually a family mediator and therapist." I blinked, surprised. "Why didn't you say anything before?" Sarah shrugged. "I wanted to be your friend first, but now I think I might be able to help. If you're interested, I could mediate between you and Richard, help you both learn to co-parent effectively." I considered her offer, thinking of Richard's broken expression at the courthouse. I think I'd like that, for Sarah's sake." As Sarah left that evening, I stood by the window watching the sunset. So much had changed in a year. I'd lost a husband, gained a daughter, and discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. I looked down at Sarah, sleeping peacefully in her crib. "We did it, little one," I whispered. "It's just you and me now. But we've got this." The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Co-parenting with Richard, building a new career, raising Sarah on my own, each day would bring new challenges. But for the first time in months, I felt truly hopeful. I was Emily Harrison, single mother, survivor, and fighter. And I was ready for whatever life threw my way next. As I crawled into bed that night, I smiled to myself. The Emily who had started this journey, scared, betrayed, and unsure, was gone. In her place stood a woman who had faced her worst fears and come out stronger. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new joys, new sorrows, but I was ready for them all, because now I knew the truth. I was capable of so much more than I'd ever imagined, and with Sarah by my side, there was nothing we couldn't face together. The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. I barely noticed the splash of bubbly on my new dress as I stared at Brad, my husband of 1 month, in disbelief. "What did you just say?" I managed to choke out, praying I'd misheard him. Brad's blue eyes, once so captivating, now seemed cold and distant. He ran a hand through his perfectly styled hair and repeated the words that had just shattered my world. "I'm in love with someone else. Aubrey, I want a divorce." The elegant anniversary dinner I'd spent hours preparing lay forgotten on the table behind us. Candles flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls of our penthouse apartment. It should have been romantic. Instead, it felt like a cruel joke. "Who is she?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Brad hesitated, then squared his shoulders. "Isabel Hartley." The name hit me like a physical blow. Isabel Hartley, the socialite whose face graced every society page and charity gala in the city. I'd always known Brad had a wandering eye, but this... "How long?" I whispered. 6 months, Brad admitted. "I'm sorry, Aubrey, I never meant for this to happen." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. "Never meant for it to happen? We've been married for 4 weeks, Brad. Did you even mean those vows?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "I thought I could make it work with us. I really did try." "Try?" I spat. "By sleeping with another woman behind my back?" Brad's expression hardened. "Look, I know this is a shock, but let's be adults about this. We can handle the divorce quietly. No need for a big scene." I gaped at him, fury rising to replace the initial shock. "A big scene? You drop this bomb on our anniversary and expect me to just roll over?" "Come on, Aubrey," Brad said, his tone patronizing. "You had to know deep down that this wasn't working. We've been drifting apart for years." "Because you've been cheating on me," I shouted, finally losing my composure. "God, how many times have I forgiven you? And now this." Brad's phone chimed. He glanced at it, then back at me. "I have to go. We can discuss the details later when you've calmed down." As he moved towards the door, something inside me snapped. I grabbed the nearest object, a crystal vase, another wedding gift, and hurled it at the wall. It exploded in a shower of glass, making Brad jump. "You want a divorce?" I snarled. "Fine. But don't think for a second I'm going to make this easy for you. I've stood by you for 10 years, Brad. I've forgiven every indiscretion, supported your career, been the perfect wife. No more." Brad's eyes widened slightly. For the first time, he looked uncertain. "What are you saying?" I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze with steel in my own. "I'm saying that if you want out of this marriage, it's going to cost you. Big time. Now, Aubrey, let's not be hasty." "Get out," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Get out before I do something we'll both regret." Brad hesitated for a moment, then nodded curtly. As the door closed behind him, I sank to the floor, heedless of the broken glass. Tears threatened, but I blinked them back furiously. No more crying over Brad Thompson. No more being the understanding, forgiving wife. As I sat there, surrounded by the wreckage of my marriage, a new resolve began to form. Brad wanted a divorce? Fine. But he was about to learn that hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. It was time to call a lawyer. I stared at the divorce papers spread across my kitchen table, a half-empty bottle of wine within easy reach. It had been 3 days since Brad's bombshell, and the shock was finally wearing off, replaced by a simmering anger that threatened to boil over at any moment. My phone buzzed. Another message from my best friend Lydia. "How are you holding up, sweetie? Need me to come over?" I sighed, typing out a quick reply. "I'm fine. Just going over everything with the lawyer tomorrow." Talk soon. The truth was, I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want their pity or their well-meaning advice. What I wanted was justice. As I poured another glass of wine, memories of the past decade flooded back. The first time I caught Brad cheating, just 2 years into our relationship. His tearful apologies, promises to change, and like a fool, I believed him. Then there was the work trip to Vegas that turned out to be a weekend with his secretary. The flirtatious texts I found on his phone from countless women. Each time I forgave him. Each time I thought things would be different. Never again, I muttered, taking a long swig of wine. The doorbell rang, startling me out of my bitter reverie. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment I considered ignoring it, but something compelled me to answer. I wish I hadn't. Brad stood in the hallway, looking annoyingly handsome in an expensive suit. "Aubrey," he said, his voice soft. "Can we talk?" Every instinct screamed at me to slam the door in his face. Instead, I stepped aside, letting him in. "Nice suit," I said coldly. "Isabel's taste, I assume?" Brad winced. "Look, I know you're angry." "Angry doesn't begin to cover it," I snapped. "What do you want, Brad?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I once found endearing. Now it just irritated me. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the alimony." I raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I'm willing to be generous," he said, pulling out a folded document. "I had my lawyer draw this up. It's a fair settlement, Aubrey. More than fair, actually." I snatched the paper from his hand, scanning the numbers. My eyes widened. It was indeed generous, far more than I'd expected. "Why?" I demanded, suspicion creeping in. "What's the catch?" Brad sighed. "No catch. I want to make this right, or as right as it can be, given the circumstances." For a moment, I almost believed him, almost fell for the sincere look in his eyes, the regretful tone in his voice. But then I remembered all the times I'd heard this before. "Make it right?" I laughed bitterly. "You can't make this right, Brad. You've humiliated me, betrayed me, and for what? Some socialite who'll probably toss you aside the moment someone richer comes along?" Brad's expression hardened. "That's not fair. Isabel and I—" "I don't want to hear it." I cut him off. "You know what? Keep your generous offer. I'll see you in court." I crumpled up the settlement offer and threw it at his chest. Brad's eyes widened in surprise. "Aubrey, don't be foolish," he warned. "This is more than you'd get in any court settlement. Think about your future." His condescending tone was the final straw. "My future?" I hissed. "My future was supposed to be with you, Brad. But you threw that away, so now I'm going to build a new future. One where I don't have to depend on your generosity or anyone else's." I yanked open the door. "Get out, and tell your lawyer to prepare for war." As the door slammed behind him, I leaned against it, heart pounding. Part of me screamed that I was making a mistake, that I should take the money and run. But a stronger part, a part I'd buried for far too long, whispered something else. It whispered of justice, of standing up for myself at last, of making Brad pay for every lie, every betrayal. I walked back to the kitchen, bypassing the wine glass for the bottle itself. Tomorrow, I'd call my lawyer. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. And this time, I wasn't backing down. I stood in the courthouse hallway, my heart pounding as I waited for my lawyer to emerge from the judge's chambers. The divorce proceedings had been a whirlwind, moving faster than I'd ever imagined possible. Brad's eagerness to settle had initially made me suspicious, but now I was beginning to understand why. The door opened and my lawyer Sarah strode out with a satisfied smile. "It's done, Aubrey. The judge approved the settlement." I blinked, stunned. "Just like that? What about the fight I was preparing for?" Sarah shrugged. "Sometimes we get lucky. Brad's lawyer pushed for a quick resolution, and the terms are more than fair. You're getting a very generous alimony package." As if summoned by his name, Brad appeared at the end of the hallway, Isabel clinging to his arm like an expensive accessory. My stomach churned at the sight of them together. "Congratulations, Aubrey," Brad said, his tone maddeningly cordial. "I hope this settlement helps you start fresh." I wanted to slap the smug look off his face. Instead, I forced a smile. "Oh, it will. Thank you for your generosity." Isabel's eyes narrowed. "Brad, darling, we'll be late for the charity gala. We should go." As they turned to leave, I couldn't resist one parting shot. "Enjoy the high life, Brad. I hope it's worth it." He paused, looking back at me with an unreadable expression. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of regret in his eyes, But then Isabel tugged on his arm, and they were gone. I let out a shaky breath. It's really over, isn't it? Sarah squeezed my shoulder. It is. And you came out on top, Aubrey. The alimony alone will set you up comfortably for years. But as we left the courthouse, a nagging doubt gnawed at me. Why had Brad given in so easily? What was he hiding? Weeks passed, and I tried to settle into my new life as a single woman. The alimony checks arrived like clockwork, each one a reminder of the life I'd left behind. I should have felt victorious, relieved. Instead, I felt empty. One rainy afternoon, as I scrolled mindlessly through social media, a headline caught my eye. Tech mogul Brad Thompson and socialite wife make splash at Hampton's gala. The photo showed Brad and Isabel dressed to the nines, champagne flutes in hand. They looked sickeningly happy, surrounded by the glitterati of New York's elite. Anger bubbled up inside me. While I sat alone in my apartment, Brad was living it up with his new wife, spending the money he'd built his company with during our marriage. I was about to close the app when another headline made me freeze. Thompson Tech stock soars after surprise merger announcement. My hands shaking, I clicked the link. Brad's company, the one he'd started with seed money from my family, had just merged with a major Silicon Valley firm. The deal was worth billions. Suddenly, Brad's eagerness to settle, his generous alimony, it all made sense. He'd known this merger was coming. He'd rushed the divorce through before the news broke, before the true value of his assets could be calculated. I'd been played. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. I felt sick, betrayed all over again. Not just by Brad, but by the system that was supposed to protect me, to ensure a fair division of our marital assets. As I sat there surrounded by the trappings of my old life, a cold determination settled over me. Brad thought he'd won, that he'd outsmarted me one last time. But he'd underestimated me, again. I picked up my phone, my fingers flying over the keys as I composed an email to Sarah. It was time to reopen the case. Time to show Brad and the world that Aubrey Thompson wasn't going down without a fight. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about justice. And I was going to get mine, no matter what it took. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen, willing the words to come. The website for my fledgling interior design business sat half-finished, a digital representation of my stalled life. It had been 3 months since the divorce, and I was struggling to find my footing. The alimony checks from Brad sat untouched in my bank account. Using that money felt like admitting defeat, like letting him win all over again. But my savings were dwindling, and the rent on this apartment, our old apartment, was due soon. A knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I opened it to find Lydia, arms laden with takeout bags. "Intervention time," she announced, breezing past me into the kitchen. "You've been ghosting everyone for weeks. Enough is enough." I sighed, following her. "I'm fine, Lydia, just busy with the new business." She fixed me with a skeptical look. "Uh-huh. And how's that going?" I gestured helplessly at my laptop. "It's a work in progress." Lydia's expression softened. "Sweetie, you can't keep punishing yourself. What happened with Brad wasn't your fault." "Wasn't it?" I countered, the bitterness I'd been suppressing bubbling to the surface. I was the one who kept forgiving him, who believed his lies. And now look at me, hiding in this apartment while he's out there living his best life with Isabel. Lydia grabbed my shoulders, forcing me to meet her gaze. "Listen to me, Aubrey. You are not the villain in this story. You're the hero. It's time you started acting like it." Her words hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. I'd been wallowing in self-pity, letting Brad's betrayal define me. It was time to take control of my narrative. With newfound determination, I turned back to my laptop. "Help me finish this website," I said to Lydia. "It's time to launch this business for real." We worked through the night, fueled by takeout and determination. By dawn, Aubrey's Interiors was live, my portfolio of past projects proudly displayed for the world to see. As the sun rose, my phone pinged with a notification, my first client inquiry, then another and another. Lydia squealed, hugging me tight. "See? You've got this." For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could do this after all. But life, as I was learning, had a way of throwing curveballs when you least expected them. A week later, as I was preparing for my first official client meeting, my phone rang. It was Sarah, my lawyer. "Aubrey, we have a problem," she said, her voice tense. Brad's lawyers are contesting the divorce settlement. They're claiming you knew about the merger before signing and are accusing you of fraud. The room spun around me. What? That's ridiculous. I had no idea. I know, Sarah cut in. But they're pushing hard. If they win, you could lose everything. The alimony, the apartment, all of it. I sank onto the couch, my mind reeling. Just when I thought I was moving forward, Brad found a way to drag me back into his web of lies. What do we do? I whispered. Sarah's voice was grim. We fight. But Aubrey, I need to know. Is there anything at all that could support their claims? Any conversations with Brad about the company before the divorce? I racked my brain, thinking back to those tumultuous weeks. Then, with a jolt, I remembered, the night Brad came over with the settlement offer. He'd mentioned something about his company, about the future. I'd been too angry to pay attention at the time, but now... There might be, I admitted, my stomach churning, but Sarah, I swear I didn't know about the merger. I believe you, she said, but a good lawyer could twist this. We need to be prepared for a tough battle. As I hung up the phone, I stared at my newly launched website. The dream I'd just begun to build was already under threat. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Brad destroy me again. If he wanted a fight, he'd get one. But this time, I'd be ready. I picked up my phone, dialing Lydia's number. I need your help, I said when she answered. It's time to dig up every bit of dirt we can find on Brad Thompson. No more playing nice. The game had changed, and I was determined to win. I never thought I'd find myself skulking outside a high-end restaurant, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Through the window, I could see Brad and Isabel laughing with a group of well-heeled socialites. The sight made my blood boil. Are you sure about this? Lydia whispered beside me. I nodded grimly. We need dirt on Brad, and his new crowd is our best bet. We'd spent weeks digging into Brad's life, looking for anything to counter his fraud accusations. So far, we'd come up empty. But tonight, Brad was dining with Isabel's father, a notoriously shady businessman. If there was dirt to be found, it would be here. As the group exited the restaurant, Lydia and I ducked behind a parked car. Brad's voice carried in the night air. Don't worry, Richard, he was saying to Isabel's father. The SEC won't find anything. I've made sure of it. My heart raced. SEC? What had Brad gotten himself into? We trailed them to a nearby bar, slipping inside and finding a secluded booth. Brad and his group were at the bar, drinks flowing freely. As the night wore on, their voices grew louder, less guarded. Another round, Brad called, his words slightly slurred, to outsmarting the government and my ex-wife. Laughter erupted from the group. I clenched my fists, fighting the urge to march over and confront him. Easy, Lydia murmured, placing a hand on my arm. We're here for information, remember? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. That's when I heard it. Brad, bragging about cooking the books for his recent merger. It was easy, he boasted. Those idiots at the SEC don't have a clue. And Aubrey? She signed away her rights without even realizing what she was giving up. The words hit me like a physical blow. Brad hadn't just cheated on me, he'd committed fraud and used our divorce to cover his tracks. Suddenly, Isabel's shrill voice cut through the din. Brad, darling, isn't that your ex-wife? I froze, realizing too late that in my shock I'd stood up from our booth. Brad's eyes met mine across the room, widening in recognition and then narrowing in anger. Time to go, Lydia hissed, grabbing my arm. We bolted for the exit, but Brad was faster. He caught up to us on the sidewalk, his face flushed with alcohol and rage. What the hell are you doing here, Aubrey? He demanded. I straightened my spine, meeting his gaze. Just having a drink, Brad. Is that a crime? Don't play dumb, he snarled. You were spying on me. What did you hear? Enough, I shot back. Enough to know that you're not just a cheater, but a criminal, too. Brad's face paled. For a moment, I thought he might hit me. Instead, he leaned in close, his breath hot on my face. Listen carefully, he hissed. You breathe a word of what you heard tonight to anyone, and I'll make sure you lose everything. The alimony, your precious little business, all of it. Do you understand me? I should have been terrified. Instead, a strange calm washed over me. In that moment, I saw Brad for what he truly was. A bully, a coward, and a fraud. No, Brad, I said quietly. You listen. I'm not the same woman you married. I'm not afraid of you anymore. So go ahead, try to take everything from me. But remember this. I know your secrets now, and I'm not afraid to use them. I turned on my heel, leaving Brad sputtering on the sidewalk. As Lydia and I hurried away, my mind raced. I had the information I needed now, but using it came with enormous risk. If I exposed Brad's fraud, I could lose everything in the ensuing legal battle. But if I stayed silent, could I live with myself? As we reached my apartment, I made my decision. I turned to Lydia, my voice steady. "Call Sarah," I said. "It's time to fight fire with fire." The battle lines were drawn, and this time I was ready for war. I stared at the television in disbelief, my coffee slipping from my fingers and shattering on the floor. Brad's face filled the screen, his usual confident smirk replaced by a look of panic. "Breaking news," the anchor announced. "Tech mogul Brad Thompson's company, Thompson Tech, is under investigation by the SEC for alleged fraud and insider trading." My phone erupted with notifications. Texts from Lydia, calls from Sarah, even messages from old mutual friends I hadn't spoken to in months. Everyone wanted to know, had I known? Was I involved? I ignored them all, my eyes glued to the screen as more details emerged. The merger that had made Brad millions was now unraveling, dragging down not just his company but several others connected to Isabel's family. A knock at the door startled me. I opened it to find Sarah, looking grim. "We need to talk," she said, pushing past me into the apartment. "The SEC wants to question you about Brad's activities during your marriage." My stomach dropped. "But I didn't know anything." Sarah's expression was sympathetic but firm. "They don't know that, and given the timing of your divorce and the merger, they think I was in on it," I finished, feeling sick. As Sarah outlined our legal options, my mind raced. I thought of the night at the bar, of Brad's drunken boasts. I had evidence that could bury him, but using it meant admitting I'd been spying on him. It could make me look complicit. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Aubrey?" Isabel's voice, usually so haughty, now sounded desperate. "Please, you have to help us. He's not handling this well." I laughed bitterly. "And why should I care?" "Because," Isabel's voice broke, "he's threatening to implicate you. He says if he goes down, he's taking you with him." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I ended the call, turning to Sarah with wide eyes. "We have a problem." Hours later, I sat in a sleek conference room, facing a team of stern-faced SEC investigators. Sarah sat beside me, a reassuring presence as I recounted my marriage to Brad, the divorce, everything I knew about his business dealings. "Mrs. Thompson," one investigator leaned forward, "are you aware that your ex-husband claims you had full knowledge of the merger and its irregularities?" I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "I am now, but it's not true. Brad kept me in the dark about his business dealings throughout our marriage." "Can you prove that?" I hesitated, then nodded. "I can, but I need assurances that I won't be implicated for how I obtained this information." The investigators exchanged glances. "Go on," I recounted the night at the bar, playing the audio recording I'd secretly made on my phone. Brad's drunken confessions filled the room, damning him with every word. As the recording ended, a heavy silence fell. The lead investigator nodded slowly. "This changes things. Mrs. Thompson, we'll need you to come in for a formal statement." I left the SEC offices feeling drained but oddly liberated. I'd taken a risk, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my own story. My phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. "You'll regret this." I should have been scared. Instead, I felt a surge of determination. Brad had underestimated me for the last time. As I hailed a cab, my phone rang again. This time, it was my biggest client, calling to cancel our contract in light of the scandal. In the span of a day, I'd become toxic by association. I leaned back in the cab, closing my eyes. I'd done the right thing, but at what cost? My business, my reputation, my future, everything I'd worked so hard to rebuild was now hanging by a thread. But as the city lights blurred past the window, I made a silent vow. I'd survived Brad's betrayal once. I would survive this too. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. Little did I know, the real battle was just beginning. The pounding on my door jolted me awake. I glanced at the clock, 3:17 a.m. My heart raced as I approached the door, peering through the peephole. What I saw made my blood run cold. Brad stood there, disheveled and wild-eyed, a far cry from the polished executive I'd once known. I hesitated, my hand on the doorknob. "Aubrey, please," his voice cracked. I know you're in there. I need your help." Against my better judgment, I opened the door. Brad stumbled in, reeking of alcohol and desperation. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, keeping my distance. Brad's eyes darted around the room. "It's all falling apart, Aubrey. The company, the merger, everything. Isabel left me. Her family's lawyers are circling like vultures. And this concerns me how?" I crossed my arms, fighting to keep my voice steady. He ran a shaking hand through his hair. "I'm sorry for everything. I was a fool, Aubrey. I threw away the best thing in my life for what? A life that was all smoke and mirrors." I'd imagined this moment so many times, Brad broken, apologizing, but now that it was happening, I felt nothing but a cold, hard anger. "You're only sorry because you got caught," I said flatly. "If your schemes had worked out, you'd still be living it up with Isabel, wouldn't you?" Brad's face crumpled. "No, that's not true. I've realized." "Save it," I cut him off. "What do you want, Brad? Why are you really here?" He took a deep breath. "I need your help. The SEC, they're building a case against me. But if you testify that you knew about the merger, that you were involved..." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to perjure myself, to go down with you?" "Please, Aubrey," he begged, reaching for my hand. I jerked away. "We were a team once. We could be again. I still love you." For a moment I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, the man I'd forgiven time and time again. But then I remembered the nights I'd cried myself to sleep, the humiliation of discovering his affairs, the way he'd discarded me for a younger model. "No," I said, my voice steel. "We're not a team, Brad. We haven't been for a long time. And you don't love me. You love what I represent. A way out of the mess you've made." Brad's face hardened. "You owe me, Aubrey, that alimony you've been living on. My money built your precious little business." I laughed bitterly. "Your money? You mean the money you defrauded from investors? The money you used to buy your way into Isabel's world?" "Be careful," Brad growled, taking a step towards me. "You don't want to make an enemy of me." Fear flashed through me, but I stood my ground. "No, Brad, you don't want to make an enemy of me. I have the recording, remember? One call to the SEC and..." Brad lunged at me, his eyes wild. I stumbled backwards, knocking over a lamp. The crash seemed to snap him out of it. He stared at his hands in horror. "Oh God, Aubrey, I'm sorry." "I didn't mean..." "Get out," I said, my voice shaking. "Get out now, or I'm calling the police." Brad's shoulders slumped in defeat. As he shuffled towards the door, he turned back one last time. "I really am sorry, Aubrey, for everything." The door closed behind him, and I sank to the floor, trembling. I'd stood my ground, but at what cost? Brad was desperate, unpredictable. What if he made good on his threats? My phone buzzed, a text from Sarah. "SEC wants to meet tomorrow. Urgent." I closed my eyes, exhaustion washing over me. In a few hours, I'd have to face the investigators again. I'd have to decide once and for all, protect myself or tell the whole truth and risk everything. As dawn broke over the city, I made my choice. Whatever came next, I was done living in Brad's shadow. It was time to write my own story, no matter the consequences. I stood in the courtroom, my heart pounding as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. Months had passed since that night Brad showed up at my door, desperate and unhinged. In that time, my world had been turned upside down. The SEC investigation had been brutal. Every aspect of my life with Brad had been scrutinized, every financial decision questioned. I'd lost clients, friends, and more than a few nights' sleep. But I'd stood my ground, telling the truth even when it hurt. Now, as I waited for the judge's decision, I caught Brad's eye across the courtroom. He looked haggard, a shell of the man who'd once commanded boardrooms. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Then I remembered all the pain he'd caused, and my resolve hardened. "In the matter of the United States versus Bradley Thompson," the judge began, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "This court finds the defendant guilty on all counts of fraud and insider trading." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I closed my eyes, a mix of relief and sadness washing over me. It was over. Finally, truly over. As the judge detailed Brad's sentence, years in prison, millions in fines, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I'd told the truth, consequences be damned, and justice had prevailed. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, shouting questions. I pushed through them, ignoring the cameras and microphones thrust in my face. Lydia was waiting by the curb, a supportive smile on her face. "You did it, Aubrey," she said, pulling me into a hug. "It's over." But it wasn't over. not really. As we drove away from the courthouse, I knew the hardest part was just beginning. I had to rebuild. My life, my business, my trust in myself. Months passed. Slowly, painstakingly, I pieced my world back together. My interior design business, nearly destroyed by the scandal, began to recover. Clients who'd abandoned me started to return, drawn by my newfound reputation for integrity. One day, as I was finishing up a consultation with a new client, I noticed a man lingering by my office door. He was handsome, with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Can I help you?" I asked, curious. He stepped forward, extending his hand. "I'm David. I hope this isn't too forward, but I've been following your story in the news. What you did, standing up to your ex-husband like that, it was incredibly brave." I felt a blush creep up my cheeks. "Thank you. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do." David's smile widened. "I was wondering if you might like to grab coffee sometime? To talk about interior design, of course," he added with a wink. For a moment, I hesitated. The wounds from Brad's betrayal were still fresh. But as I looked into David's eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Genuine admiration and respect. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with my boldness. As David and I walked out of my office chatting easily, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. The woman staring back at me wasn't the same one who'd stood shell-shocked in her kitchen all those months ago, listening to her husband confess his affair. This woman was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand up for herself. She'd faced her worst fears and come out the other side, battered but unbroken. I thought of Brad, sitting in his prison cell, stripped of the wealth and status he'd valued above all else. I no longer felt anger or bitterness towards him. Instead, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. His betrayal had forced me to confront my own strength, to rebuild my life on my terms. In trying to destroy me, he'd inadvertently set me free. As David held the door open for me, I stepped out into the sunlight, ready to embrace whatever came next. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I was excited to face it. My story wasn't over. It was just beginning.